It begins not in the mortal world, but in the endless brightness of Olympus, a realm where clouds swirl like pale silk, and the air hums with the music of immortal thought. There, amid gold and thunder, Zeus, the king of gods, suffers a torment unlike any other. His temples pound, his cries echo through the heavens, and all creation trembles at the sound. The gods gather in alarm, Hermes quick with worry, Apollo with healing in his hands, but nothing can ease the pain splitting their father's skull. Then, in a single, blinding instant, the sky erupts with light. A thunderclap tears through eternity, and from the very forehead of Zeus, fully formed and armored, springs Athena radiant, fierce, and calm all at once. The clang of her shield is like the first note of reason, ringing through chaos. The world halts in awe, her grey eyes, deep as storm clouds and sharp as thought itself, open upon the new dawn of intellect and order. The gods stare first in shock, then reverence. Even Zeus, now relieved of pain, gazes at his daughter with pride and wonder. She is born not from flesh, but from mind, not from chaos, but from consciousness. She is the child of divine thought, the embodiment of wisdom sharpened by power. In her hands gleam the spear and shield, symbols not of destruction, but of defense of truth and just war, where intellect guides strength. The air around her hums with purpose. The winds themselves seem to bow. From that moment, Athena stands apart, untouched by vanity, serene yet formidable. She is unlike Aphrodite's tender allure or Artemis's wild freedom. Hers is a quieter command, an eternal stillness beneath which the mind awakens. From Olympus, she gazes downward. Below her, the mortal world stretches vast, unformed, humming with life and confusion. There, mortals toil, love, dream, and err. They craft tools, tell stories, and fight endless wars. And Athena, seeing them, feels a flicker of something divine, yet human compassion, mixed with curiosity. She will guide them, she decides, not as one who rules through fear, but as one who lights the path through darkness. The other gods sense her purpose. Ares laughs, promising chaos and blood. Poseidon frowns, feeling already the rivalry that destiny will write between them. Hera watches with cautious respect, but Athena simply steps forward, silent, her spear gleaming like the morning star. The world below awaits her mind's touch. Time in Olympus flows like water through eternity, yet Athena's presence reshapes it. The other gods see her craft cities of thought, not of marble. She teaches the use of strategy, the value of balance. She is the goddess who stands between impulse and understanding, the still hand in the storm. When mortals pray to her, their voices rise not in desperation, but in reasoned hope. They ask for insight before battle, wisdom before judgment, clarity before rage. She listens, and often she answers not in thunder or flame, but in quiet signs. The flutter of an owl, the pattern of clouds, the whisper in the mind before a decision. Her symbol becomes the owl, bird of night and thought, whose eyes cut through darkness. Olive branches spring where she walks, symbols of peace and endurance. She prefers the hum of thought to the roar of war. Yet when battle calls, she stands beside those who fight for justice, not conquest. Still, her birth leaves questions even among gods. How can wisdom emerge from power's head? What does it mean that thought was born from thunder? In her existence lies the paradox of the Greek soul, the belief that true power comes not from brute strength, but from understanding. To the Greeks who would soon shape their golden age, Athena becomes the heart of that ideal, the marriage of intellect and courage, reason and valor. As eons drift like clouds, mortals begin to build altars in her name. Her temples are not places of frenzy, but of reflection. Philosophers claim her as their patron. Warriors carry her symbol upon their shields. Women pray to her for skill in craft, men for clarity in counsel. She belongs to neither gender, neither passion, nor indifference. She is equilibrium itself, poised between chaos and order. From her throne on Olympus, Athena watches the mortal world with deepening fascination. Empires rise and fall, cities whisper with ambition, and humans continue to chase the same eternal struggle between wisdom and pride. In them, she sees reflections of her divine father and of herself. They too are children of thought, born of struggle and desire. Yet, for all her serenity, Athena is not immune to emotion. In the silence of her chambers, she feels the weight of foresight, the awareness that mortals will never cease to test the balance she upholds. They will challenge her patience, provoke her justice, and mistake intellect for coldness. And though she loves humanity, she knows the cost of teaching them wisdom. As the stars glide across the endless sky, Athena rises and steps onto the edge of Olympus. Below her, a mortal city takes shape, its people daring, inventive, yearning for greatness. It is not yet called Athens, but the seed is there. Ambition tempered by reason, beauty tempered by restraint. A single olive tree grows upon a rocky hill, its leaves silver beneath the moonlight. Athena smiles faintly. Her story with this city is about to begin, but before she descends, her gaze drifts once more to Zeus. The father of thunder sits upon his golden throne, proud yet pensive. He sees in his daughter the perfect balance of what he himself struggles to be, wise yet strong. She is his triumph and his reminder, proof that thought itself can rival even the lightning bolt. In that moment, Olympus feels still. The winds hush, the clouds part, and the earth below glows faintly with silver light. The goddess of wisdom, newly born, stands poised at the threshold of divine purpose. Her armor gleams like dawn. Her eyes hold the calm of infinite understanding. And as she takes her first step toward the world of mortals, even the stars seem to follow her lead, guiding, eternal, serene. For from the mind of Zeus came not just a goddess, but an idea that would shape civilizations. That wisdom, once born, cannot be unmade. It will walk among mortals forever, invisible yet ever present, whispering in dreams, guiding in silence, waiting in patience. And thus begins the story of Athena, goddess of wisdom, of war, of the human spirit's eternal awakening. The goddess of wisdom and war. From the moment of her birth, Athena's presence radiated an energy unlike any other among the gods. She was born not from chaos or love, not from earth or sea, but from thought itself, from the storm of Zeus's mind. This origin would define her essence forever, wisdom forged in the fire of divine power. Among the pantheon, each god held dominion over some aspect of existence. Poseidon over the seas, Apollo over the sun and art, Artemis over the wild and moon, Ares over blood and fury. Yet Athena's realm was subtler, infinitely more complex. She ruled not over the visible world, but over the invisible balance between passion and intellect. Her domain was the space between the sword and the word, between fury and justice. In Olympus, the gods often quarreled for sport, their arguments echoing like thunder across eternity. Yet when Athena spoke, even the winds hushed. Her words carried weight, not from power, but from clarity. She did not demand obedience, she inspired it, for she spoke as one who understood both chaos and order and knew the fragile line that separated them. Unlike her half-brother Ares, who delighted in war's carnage, Athena viewed battle as a discipline of the mind. Where Ares swung his blade in passion, she wielded hers with precision. To her, every strike, every movement was strategy, each action a lesson in self-control. If Ares was the god of bloodlust, Athena was the goddess of restraint. And yet, restraint was not weakness. When she entered battle, she did so with a terrifying serenity. Clad in gleaming bronze, Her shield, the Aegis, bore the head of the Gorgon Medusa, a reminder of wisdom's power to turn ignorance to stone. Her spear, straight and unwavering, symbolized the sharpness of intellect cutting through confusion. Her very presence on the field could steady an army or silence a storm. To the Greeks, Athena was not simply divine, she was aspirational. Her wisdom was not remote or abstract, but practical, embodied in the very acts of living and leading. Farmers prayed to her for the patience of cultivation, artisans for the mastery of craft, and kings for the clarity to rule justly. When a general stood before his troops, trembling at the dawn of war, he might close his eyes and whisper her name, not for victory alone, but for the courage to think before striking. She was reason incarnate, yet her compassion flowed quietly beneath that reason. Unlike Hera's jealous wrath or Poseidon's tempestuous pride, Athena's justice was impartial. She could defend mortals or gods alike, siding only with truth and purpose. It was said that she never acted from emotion alone, but neither was she cold. Her wisdom did not silence, feeling it tempered it, shaping passion into purpose as a blacksmith shapes metal into art. Yet even Athena, for all her composure, was not without mystery. The other gods sometimes wondered how she could exist without mother, without childhood, without the vulnerability that tempers the divine. She was eternal maturity, an intellect unscarred by doubt. And yet, deep within her, there was a loneliness, a quiet recognition that she was born not from the cradle of love, but from the solitude of thought. She often wandered alone along the halls of Olympus, her footsteps echoing softly between marble pillars. The constellations glittered above her, cold and distant. When she paused to look upon the mortal world, she saw them striving, failing, learning. Each spark of their intellect reminded her that even in imperfection lay beauty. For wisdom, she knew, was not the absence of error, it was the ability to learn from it. And so, Athena began to shape her role not as ruler, but as mentor. She would not dictate from Olympus, but walk unseen among mortals, whispering insight where it was most needed. In dreams, she appeared to kings before battles, to artisans before inventions, to poets before epiphanies. Her influence moved through the human world like a breeze through olive leaves, gentle, unseen, transformative. Mortals told countless tales of her interventions. When a soldier hesitated before chaos, it was said Athena steadied his hand. When a ruler faced the burden of choice, her presence brought calm to his heart. When an artist sought perfection, she guided the rhythm of his mind. She was wisdom not as distant philosophy, but as living presence, divine intellect moving through human thought. Still, Athena's existence held contradictions. She was a goddess of war, yet she cherished peace. She was a virgin, untouched by desire, yet her name inspired fierce devotion. She defended cities, yet her true citadel was within the mind. To understand her was to glimpse the dual nature of all existence, the harmony of opposites that defines both gods and men. Ares, consumed by envy, often mocked her restraint. "Sister," he sneered, "you wield your spear as if it were a pen. What glory lies in hesitation?" But Athena only smiled, her grey eyes unflinching. "Glory," she replied, "is not in conquest, but in mastery of oneself." And so their rivalry became legend. When Ares marched to battle, roaring, Athena followed in silence. Where his armies drowned fields in blood, she rebuilt the order that followed. When mortals praised Ares for victory, they thanked Athena for survival. He fought for dominion, she fought for meaning. The Greeks, in their temples and tragedies, saw this eternal dance as reflection of their own souls, the struggle between rage and reason, between the heart's fire and the mind's light. Athena's symbol, the owl, became the emblem of this vision. Unlike the eagle of Zeus or the dove of Aphrodite, the owl was not a creature of day. It saw in darkness what others could not. Its gaze pierced shadow to find truth. Its silence mirrored thought before speech. To carry the owl upon one's coin or crest was to proclaim allegiance to insight over impulse, to wisdom over ignorance. Over time, the people of Greece began to feel her presence not as thunder but as quiet certainty. When they built ships to cross the wine-dark sea, they invoked her name for guidance. When they carved marble into gods and heroes, they did so with the measured grace she embodied. When philosophers gathered beneath olive trees to question the nature of the world, they felt her spirit in every syllable. Athena became the invisible architect of civilization itself. The arts, the sciences, the laws all bore her imprint. She was the divine reflection of what humans could become when thought conquered fear. To love Athena was to aspire to clarity, discipline, and truth. To anger her was to embrace chaos and arrogance, the blindness that comes when one mistakes cleverness for wisdom. And yet, Athena's compassion endured even for those who erred, for she understood that mortals, unlike gods, learned only through struggle. Their flaws were not failure but the soil of growth. Thus she watched them with patience, intervening only when the lesson risked being lost forever. Her image spread across temples and pottery, etched in silver and bronze. A tall, serene figure, spear in one hand, shield in the other, her robe flowing like wind-carved stone. Upon her breastplate gleamed the aegis, alive with the echoes of the Gorgon's cry. Artists could never capture the fullness of her gaze. It was said that to look into Athena's eyes was to see one's own reflection, not as one was, but as one could be. Yet even as she watched over mortals, Athena's destiny was not static. The threads of fate wove onward, binding her to the rise of a city that would bear her name, a people who would mirror her virtues, and a legacy that would outlast Olympus itself. Already, whispers stirred in the mortal realm, a new city rising upon the rocky hills of Attica. Two gods, it was said, would vie for its patronage: Poseidon, lord of the sea, and Athena, daughter of wisdom. It would be a contest not of destruction, but of creation, a battle of gifts, not weapons. Through it, Athena would reveal to mortals the true meaning of power: not force, but foresight; not dominance, but harmony. As the stars wheeled above Olympus, their cold fires flickering like sparks of thought, Athena turned her gaze toward that land. The sea glimmered like molten glass beneath the moon, and beyond it, the future waited uncertain, luminous, alive. She stood at the edge of Zeus's great hall, silent as the wind through the olive groves. Behind her, the laughter of gods echoed faintly. Ahead, the human world called softly through the night. She could already feel its heartbeat, its curiosity, its ambition, its fragile wisdom, and she knew that within it lay her truest reflection. The goddess of wisdom and war lifted her spear. The bronze tip caught the first blush of dawn, burning with golden fire. In that glow shimmered the dual promise of her being, that the mind could be both shield and sword, and that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of it. From this truth, all civilizations would one day rise. From this balance, the world itself would find meaning. And so, Athena descended once more toward a waiting city, toward a destiny written not in stars, but in the hearts and thoughts of humankind. The age of heroes, when the world was young and the memory of Titans still echoed faintly through the wind. There came a time when mortals rose beyond their fragility. The poets would later call it the Age of Heroes, a span of centuries when men and women, half divine and half human, carried within them a spark that could rival even Olympus. And at the heart of many of their triumphs stood Athena, silent yet watchful, the guiding force behind human courage, disciplined by thought. She did not appear in thunder or flame. Her interventions came in whispers, visions, the brief flicker of wisdom at a moment of despair. For she understood that true greatness was not born from divine rescue, but from mortals learning to find their own strength. She became the unseen teacher of heroes, the calm voice that steadied trembling hands. Among the first to seek her guidance was Perseus, the youth destined to confront the monstrous Gorgon. When the oracle spoke of his task to slay Medusa and bring back her head, he felt terror coil in his chest. But as he stood beneath a moonlit sky, Athena descended, her armor shimmering like liquid silver. She said no words, yet he felt her thoughts enter his own. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. In his dreams, she revealed the mirrored shield, a way to face horror without losing oneself to it. She placed that shield in his hands, and in its reflection Perseus saw his destiny not as a doomed man, but as an instrument of divine purpose. When Perseus entered the lair of the Gorgons, he did so with her calm upon his heart. The cave smelled of death and stone, the air heavy with the silent agony of those who had met Medusa's gaze. He lifted Athena's shield, seeing only her reflection. In that image was the wisdom of the goddess herself, the ability to see clearly without succumbing to darkness. When the sword struck and silence fell, Athena's spirit moved through the chamber like a wind, bearing away the weight of mortal terror. She guided others as well, shaping the fate of heroes whose names would echo across centuries. To Bellerophon, who sought to tame the winged horse Pegasus, she appeared in the cool of the dawn. The horse, wild and untouchable, resisted every mortal hand, but Athena brought him a golden bridle, forged from sunlight and will. With it, Bellerophon mastered Pegasus, not through dominance, but through harmony. Together, they soared into legend, their bond a symbol of wisdom bridling strength. To Heracles, the mightiest of all, Athena was more than counselor, she was conscience. His labors were cruel, born from divine punishment, yet she stood beside him in each trial, teaching him that redemption was not achieved through brute force, but through perseverance and humility. When he cleansed the Augean stables, when he wrestled death itself for the soul of Alcestis, her presence steadied him. In moments when wrath might have consumed him, her hand upon his shoulder reminded him that even gods respected those who mastered themselves. To Jason, captain of the Argonauts, she gave the gift of craft, the building of the Argo itself. With her guidance, the ship became more than wood and sail. It became an extension of thought, the first vessel built with precision born of design. Its prow gleamed with wisdom, its journey across the seas a reflection of the human quest for discovery. Athena's influence was not limited to men. She watched over women who defied the boundaries of their age, who carried strength cloaked in grace. To her, the craft of weaving was sacred not for its simplicity, but because it mirrored creation itself. Every thread, every pattern, spoke of intellect shaping beauty. The hum of the loom was a hymn to her, a quiet act of devotion echoing through every household in Greece. She was there, too, in the story of Odysseus long before Troy's fires began to glow. The young prince of Ithaca, restless and clever, often prayed not for power but for understanding. It was Athena who whispered his name to the fates, marking him as one of her chosen. His sharp mind, his patience, his cunning, these were her gifts long before he would need them on his endless voyage home. The poet sang of Athena's many forms, for she could appear as warrior or woman, as storm or stillness. To mortals, her presence was both comfort and challenge. When she looked upon them, they felt seen not for what they were, but for what they could become. She was not the goddess of easy victories, but of earned wisdom, of pain turned to purpose. Her temples multiplied across the land, small stone sanctuaries filled with the scent of olive oil and burning myrrh. Within them, priests and artisans carved her likeness. A tall, calm figure with eyes of deep grey, holding both spear and scroll. They prayed not for wealth, but for clarity. To her they offered olive branches, tokens of peace born from struggle. In return, they felt the quiet strength that allowed civilizations to rise. In the flicker of oil lamps, old storytellers recounted how Athena stood by heroes at their most fragile moments. They spoke of her descent upon battlefields shrouded in dust and cries, where men, half blind with rage, felt a sudden stillness in their hearts, a pause before the killing blow. That stillness was her. They said that when armies faltered, an owl's shadow crossed the sky, and the tide turned toward justice. As centuries passed, the stories intertwined, forming a great tapestry of wisdom and valor. The Age of Heroes was remembered as a time when gods and mortals walked the same path, when wisdom shaped courage, and courage gave birth to civilization. Athena's influence moved through it all, unseen yet unmistakable, like the pulse beneath the skin of the world. Her father Zeus watched her often in silence. Among all his children, none carried his essence more purely. She had inherited his thunder but transmuted it into thought, his authority but tempered it with mercy. Where he ruled by decree, she ruled by persuasion. He saw in her the future of the gods, the idea that power without understanding would one day fade. And yet, Athena did not dwell in pride. For every hero who succeeded, she saw another who failed. Pride destroyed as often as it built, and even the wisest stumbled when they mistook divine favor for invincibility. She wept for them in quiet places where no one could see. Her tears fell upon the earth and turned to dew upon the olive leaves, a reminder that even the gods grieved for the lessons mortals learned too late. Night after night, she walked the halls of Olympus, her footsteps echoing softly. The constellations shone with the faces of heroes, Perseus among the stars, Pegasus forever in flight. They were her students, her companions in eternity, their deeds woven into the memory of the world. But she did not bask in their glory. To her, each act of courage was a seed, and it was the harvest of wisdom she sought. From her vantage above the mortal realm, Athena saw a change stirring in the human heart. Mortals were beginning to look not just to gods for answers, but within themselves. They learned that thought, discipline, and compassion could be divine in their own right. That realization filled her with quiet joy. For if mortals could carry even a fragment of her wisdom, then perhaps they would one day stand without needing her hand. The age of heroes would one day end, its myths softened by time, its names carved into stone and story. But its spirit, Athena's spirit, would endure. For every act of courage guided by reason, every invention born of insight, every law shaped by fairness, would carry the trace of her mind. The wind that moved through Greece was filled with her whisper. It lingered in the sound of the loom, in the rhythm of oars cutting water, in the hush of soldiers before dawn. It lived in the calm between heartbeats, where choice becomes destiny. And when the fires of Olympus dimmed and mortal history marched forward, it would still be there, the voice of Athena, eternal, speaking through every mind that sought to understand the world before it changed it. Perseus and the head of Medusa. The story of Perseus began as most mortal legends do, with fear, prophecy, and the quiet turning of divine attention. He was born to Danae, daughter of King Acrisius of Argos, a woman of beauty and grace whose life had been sealed by fate before she ever held her child. For it had been foretold that her son would one day bring about her father's downfall. Terrified of the oracle's warning, Acrisius locked Danae away in a bronze chamber deep beneath the palace, where no man might ever reach her. But the will of the gods moves through barriers as easily as thought through silence. One night, the room filled with golden light, soft and pulsing like the breath of dawn. Zeus descended not in storm or thunder, but as a shower of radiant dust, falling gently upon the imprisoned maiden. From that light, Perseus was conceived, a child of mortal innocence and divine power. When Acrisius discovered the boy, his fear grew into cruelty. He dared not shed the blood of Zeus's son, yet he would not defy fate by raising him. He placed Danae and her infant in a chest and cast them into the sea. For days they drifted across the dark waters, the waves slapping the wooden sides like slow, patient drums. Danae prayed to the gods, and her cries rose into the wind. Somewhere above, Athena listened. When at last the chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, a fisherman named Dictys found it and raised the boy as his own. Perseus grew strong, curious, and brave, his eyes clear, his spirit steady. Yet the island was not without danger. Its king, Polydectes, coveted Danae and plotted to remove her son. Under the guise of festivity, he demanded every man bring a horse as tribute, mocking Perseus, who had none to give. Desperate to defend his mother's honor, the young man spoke rashly. "Then name your gift, and I shall fetch it, be it even the head of Medusa." The hall fell silent. Polydectes smiled, a smile sharp as a blade, and declared that the challenge was accepted. Thus began the impossible quest. Medusa, once a woman of beauty and grace, had been transformed into a creature of horror by Athena's own hand, for the Gorgon had desecrated her temple, consumed by pride and lust, and the goddess, though sorrowful, had turned her into a living punishment, a reminder that sacredness must not be defiled. Snakes writhed upon her head, her eyes burned with unnatural light, and all who met her gaze were turned to stone. She was not evil by nature, but by consequence a tragedy frozen in flesh. When Perseus set out, the gods took notice. Athena descended to him in the cool grey light of dawn, her form both ethereal and solid, her armour shimmering with calm purpose. She looked upon him not as a child of Zeus, but as a mind willing to learn. Without speaking, she extended a hand. In it gleamed a polished bronze shield, its surface so perfect it mirrored the world like still water. "Look not upon her directly," she said, her voice like a whisper carried by the wind. "See through reflection, for even monsters may teach us the cost of blindness." Then she stepped back, and Hermes appeared beside her, offering a curved sword of celestial steel light enough to wield swiftly, sharp enough to pierce stone. Together they sent him onward, their forms dissolving into the horizon. Guided by Athena's wisdom, Perseus sought the grey eye, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye between them. He waited until the moment one passed it to another, and with sudden cunning snatched it from their withered hands. They shrieked and begged for its return, but he held firm, promising to restore it only if they revealed where the Gorgons dwelled. Reluctantly, they told him, far beyond Oceanus, in the twilight lands where day and night touch. Athena watched unseen as he crossed deserts, mountains, and shadowed plains. She sent him signs, the hoot of an owl at midnight, the glint of starlight on his shield to guide his steps. When at last he reached the edge of the world, he found the lair of the Gorgons, silent and terrible. Around its entrance stood statues of warriors and beasts, each twisted in agony, reminders of those who had failed before him. He crept inside. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and salt. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the cavern, touching the scales of sleeping serpents. Medusa lay among her sisters, her breath slow and deep, the snakes upon her head shifting in restless dreams. Perseus raised Athena's shield before him, gazing into its reflection. There, distorted but clear, he saw her face, a face both monstrous and mournful. His heart ached with pity, for even in her cursed form there lingered something human, something lost. But he remembered the goddess's warning. Moving like the shadow of a thought, he approached, his sword poised. The sound of metal slicing air was almost gentle. One stroke, guided by Athena's steady will, and silence fell. The serpents hissed once, then went still. From the neck of the slain Gorgon, 2 beings sprang forth: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior born of gold, proof that even in death, creation could emerge from destruction. Perseus placed the head carefully into a sack of bronze. Though lifeless, its power endured. With Athena's unseen aid, he rose into the sky upon Pegasus's back and fled the Gorgon's wrath. Storms chased him across the heavens, but the goddess shielded him from harm. On his journey home, he came upon the land of Ethiopia, where a maiden named Andromeda was chained to a rock, condemned to be devoured by a sea monster as punishment for her mother's pride. Without hesitation, Perseus descended. The creature rose from the depths, its jaws vast as caverns. But the hero, recalling Athena's calm in crisis, reached into the bronze sack. The Gorgon's head flashed like lightning, and the beast turned to stone. The waves broke upon it harmlessly. Athena watched from above, her expression unreadable. In Perseus's victory, she saw not triumph, but understanding the mortal realization that wisdom must temper strength. He returned at last to Seriphos, where Polydectes awaited, mocking still. Perseus spoke no word. He revealed the Gorgon's head, and in an instant the tyrant and his court turned to cold marble, their cruelty preserved forever. When the task was done, Perseus sought Athena once more. With reverent hands, he offered her the head of Medusa. She accepted it in solemn silence, knowing that power such as this must be guarded, not used. She fastened it upon her aegis, transforming it into both warning and protection, the ultimate symbol of wisdom's vigilance over corruption. The story of Perseus spread across Greece like light spilling from a door left ajar. Parents told their children of the goddess's guidance, of courage born from thought, of strength that did not destroy but purified. The poets sang that Athena had not only aided Perseus, but watched him learn to wield his gifts with humility, a reflection of her own divine nature. In time, Perseus's deeds faded into myth, but the image of the mirrored shield endured. To look within, to see the reflection rather than the illusion that was the lesson Athena left the world. Every act of wisdom, every discovery, every invention that challenged darkness with understanding was a reflection of that shield still gleaming in the mortal mind. As centuries turned, Athena's temples grew larger, her statues grander, yet her truest monument was the quiet strength of those who, like Perseus, chose intellect over impulse, courage over chaos. In them, the goddess saw her own creation reborn, not carved from marble, but awakened in flesh and spirit. And when the wind swept through the olive groves of Greece, rustling the leaves with a sound like whispered prayer, mortals would say it was Athena herself, passing by, watching, remembering, waiting for the next hero who would understand that even in facing monsters, the truest victory is not in killing the beast, but in mastering the fear that feeds it. The Weaver's Challenge, Arachne's Fall. In a quiet town of Lydia, far from the temples of marble and the thunder of Olympus, there lived a mortal girl whose fingers moved like wind upon the loom. Her name was Arachne. Her skill in weaving was so rare that even nymphs and dryads came down from the hills to watch her work. In the soft glow of her cottage, threads shimmered under her touch, threads of gold, crimson, and sky blue, woven so fine that they seemed to breathe. Her tapestries told stories of gods and mortals, of love and loss, of triumph and ruin. The people whispered that Athena herself must have taught her, for only the goddess of craft and wisdom could shape beauty with such precision. But Arachne, proud and young, laughed when they said so. "No goddess," she declared, "has guided my hand. My skill is mine alone." The words drifted upward, carried by the wind to Olympus, and there Athena heard. She did not react with anger at first. The goddess knew the pride of mortals. She understood how easily brilliance turns to arrogance. Yet something in Arachne's tone, mocking, ungrateful, defiant, cut through her calm. It was not that Arachne had talent. It was that she denied the sacred bond between creation and humility. One evening, Athena descended to the mortal world disguised as an old woman, her cloak rough, her steps slow. She entered the weaver's cottage, where the girl worked beneath lamplight, her loom singing with rhythm. The goddess spoke softly, her voice trembling with age. "Child, your gift is great," she said, "but beware of pride. Give thanks to the goddess who grants such skill, lest she take it from you." Arachne did not bow or pause. Her eyes flashed. "Old mother," she replied, "why should I thank one who has taught me nothing? If Athena herself would weave beside me, let her come, and I shall prove whose art is greater." The air grew still. The old woman straightened. The light of the lamp caught her eyes, and in an instant they turned grey as storm clouds. Her cloak fell away, and in its place gleamed armour of gold and silver. Arachne fell back, trembling, for she knew then who stood before her. Athena's expression was sorrow, not fury. "You have summoned me," she said. "Let your wish be fulfilled." The loom of the goddess appeared beside the mortals, its frame carved of olive wood, its threads shimmering like dawn. Word spread through the town, and soon a crowd gathered outside. The contest began. Athena worked with calm precision, her shuttle moving like a heartbeat. Her tapestry told of the gods' power and their benevolence. Zeus upon his throne, Poseidon taming the seas, Athena herself guiding heroes and cities. The threads glowed with divine harmony. Her cloth was the very essence of order and grace. Arachne's hands, meanwhile, moved with furious speed. Her tapestry did not praise the gods, it questioned them. She wove scenes of their failings. Zeus disguised in deceit, Poseidon's wrath, Apollo's unkept vows, Dionysus's madness. Her art was flawless, each detail rendered with cruel beauty. The crowd gasped, for her skill equaled the goddess's, perhaps even surpassed it. When the final threads were tied, the two works hung side by side, perfection and rebellion, divinity and defiance. Athena gazed upon Arachne's creation and felt a stab of admiration, but within it lay arrogance, a mortal's hand mocking the immortal. The goddess's calm faltered. "You have skill," she said, her voice soft as the rustle of silk, but no reverence. "You have woven truth, yet without wisdom, and truth without wisdom becomes blasphemy." It sought the Woesdalers for tiles. Then, with a touch of her hand, Athena transformed the cloth. The colours dimmed, the figures twisted, the threads trembled as if alive. Arachne gasped, watching her masterpiece unravel before her eyes. Despair consumed her. In a moment of anguish, she seized the loose threads and tied them around her neck, crying that she would rather die than live without her art. Athena, struck by pity, reached out. "No, child," she whispered. "You shall not die, but you shall weave forever." She touched Arachne's brow, and the girl's form began to change. Her limbs grew thin, her fingers lengthened into delicate legs. Her body lightened until she hung by a single thread, a spider small, fragile, eternal. The crowd cried out, some in horror, some in awe. Arachne hung there, her new body glistening with dew. From her spinnerets flowed silk finer than any thread she had ever touched. She began to weave again, instinctively, endlessly. Her tapestry now shimmered in the morning light, fragile yet perfect. Athena watched in silence. She did not rejoice in victory. She had not sought vengeance, only understanding. Yet the sight of Arachne, once proud, now humble, filled her with sorrow. "May your weaving endure," the goddess said softly, as warning and remembrance. "Let every artist know, creation is sacred, and arrogance the thread that unravels it." In fact, Isolde, she departed, leaving behind the whisper of wind and the trembling web glistening among olive branches. The people of Lydia carried the tale through the land, and wherever spiders spun their silver threads, they said it was Arachne's spirit still at work, weaving the story of her fall. But Athena, alone upon Olympus, pondered the lesson herself. For though Arachne had been prideful, her courage to challenge even the divine was a mirror of the human spirit that Athena cherished most, the hunger to create, to understand, to question. And she realized that wisdom did not mean silence before power. It meant knowing when reverence must balance defiance. In time, Athena's own heart softened toward the weaver she had punished. She watched the spiders in her temples, spinning quietly among the rafters, their threads catching the dawn. To the goddess, they were reminders not of rebellion, but of persistence, proof that beauty endures, even in consequence. The story of Arachne spread far beyond Lydia. In every corner of Greece, mothers told their daughters of the girl who wove against a goddess. Some told it as a warning, others as a song of sorrow, others still as a tale of divine mercy. But all agreed that from that day forth, weaving was not mere craft, it was communion, the mortal echo of Athena's eternal art. The rhythm of the loom became sacred. Each pull of thread, each crossing of warp and weft, became a quiet prayer to the goddess who had once challenged pride with wisdom and sorrow with understanding. And though Arachne hung forever between heaven and earth, Athena made sure her story would never fade, for within its strands lay a truth as enduring as time itself, that creation, at its highest form, is both a gift and a responsibility, that beauty without humility leads not to glory, but to loneliness. When the sun rose over Olympus and light touched the silver webs glistening in the trees, Athena looked down upon the world she guided. The wind whispered through the olive leaves, carrying the faintest sound of weaving, a reminder that every act of artistry was a dialogue between mortal hands and divine wisdom. In that sound, soft and rhythmic as breath, the goddess found peace again. The Trojan War begins. Long before the smoke of Troy darkened the Aegean sky, the seeds of its ruin were sown in a moment of divine pride. The gods, like mortals, were not immune to vanity, and even on Olympus, jealousy could ignite the fires of fate. It began with a wedding, one meant to bind harmony among gods and mortals alike, yet destined to fracture it forever. The hall of the sea goddess Thetis shimmered with coral light as the immortals gathered to celebrate her union with the mortal king Peleus. Tables of ambrosia gleamed beneath lanterns of pearl, and the music of lyres drifted across the waves. Yet one goddess had been deliberately uninvited, Eris, the spirit of discord. No feast welcomes strife, and yet none can truly exclude her. In vengeance, Eris appeared unbidden, her shadow falling over the feast. She said nothing. From her hand she tossed a single golden apple onto the banquet table. Upon its surface, in letters that glowed like embers, were inscribed 3 simple words: "To the fairest." The laughter stopped. Aphrodite's eyes flashed with delight, Hera's with suspicion, and Athena's with the quiet restraint of one who knows that silence can be both strength and test. The apple lay between them, glittering, pulsing like a heartbeat. Hera claimed it by right of her majesty as queen of the gods. Aphrodite claimed it by the perfection of her beauty, and Athena, calm, analytical, yet proud, claimed it for the harmony of mind and grace, the beauty born of intellect rather than form. Zeus, uneasy, refused to judge between them. "Let mortals decide," he declared, and turned his gaze toward the world below. He chose Paris, Prince of Troy, shepherd and judge, whose mortal heart would bear the weight of divine rivalry. So the 3 descended upon Mount Ida, each radiant in her own splendor. Hera promised Paris power and dominion, the rule of kings. Athena offered him glory in battle, wisdom beyond all men, the eternal crown of honor. But Aphrodite, smiling softly, whispered a different gift. Love the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris's choice was swift, driven not by reason but by desire. He placed the apple in Aphrodite's hand. From that moment, the fate of Troy was sealed. Athena's calm mask did not shatter, but within her, the spark of indignation burned. She did not rage like Hera, nor weep like Thetis. Her revenge would not come from emotion, but from principle. For she saw in Paris's decision the triumph of impulse over wisdom, of lust over truth, and she knew that such imbalance must be corrected, whatever the cost. From that moment, Athena's path intertwined with the destiny of Troy. She would stand beside the Greeks, not out of hatred, but out of justice. For Troy's sin was not Paris's alone, it was the blindness of all who allowed beauty to outweigh reason. Years passed. Across the Aegean, kings gathered in council, bound by oaths and pride. Helen, the prize Aphrodite had promised, was taken from Sparta to Troy, and Menelaus, her husband, called upon his brother Agamemnon and every Greek chieftain to avenge the insult. The call to arms echoed through Mycenae, Ithaca, and Argos. Athena moved among them like thought itself. She whispered courage into Menelaus's heart, clarity into Odysseus's mind, and foresight into Diomedes's gaze. She guided the forging of spears and the building of ships, knowing that mortal ambition needed divine order to steer it. As the fleet of 1,000 black ships gathered at Aulis, their sails swelling like storm clouds, Athena stood beside them unseen. The sea wind carried her presence, calm yet stern. She knew the suffering that was to come, the decades of blood and ruin, but she also knew that through it, humanity would learn the terrible cost of pride. On the eve of their departure, a terrible omen appeared. The goddess Artemis demanded sacrifice for the winds to blow. Agamemnon, desperate, wavered between duty and love. Athena watched from afar, silent, for even she could not interfere with the will of fate. The knife fell, and the war began. When the Greeks landed on the shores of Troy, the earth shook beneath their charge. The Trojans met them with courage, the walls of their city gleaming under the morning sun. Athena's eyes, grey and distant, surveyed the battlefield. She did not rejoice in the slaughter. She watched, studied, judged. To her, the war was not a game of gods, but a crucible of mankind. Ares, ever eager for chaos, revelled in the carnage. He leapt among the warriors, his laughter mingling with screams. Athena opposed him at every turn. She moved like logic through madness, guiding the Greeks to fight with strategy, not rage. She stood beside heroes like Diomedes, lending him the strength to wound even gods. When Ares charged, crimson and wild, Athena struck him down, her spear piercing his pride more deeply than flesh. The mortals who fought under her gaze felt her presence as clarity amid confusion. In the dust and noise, a sudden thought, a moment's calm, a perfect decision was her whisper. They did not always win, for she did not grant victory lightly. Her blessing was earned through discipline, not desire. Meanwhile, in the high towers of Troy, Queen Hecuba prayed to her, offering robes of finest weave, imploring her to spare the city. But Athena turned away. The insult of Paris's judgment lingered, not out of personal vanity, but out of cosmic balance. Troy had chosen beauty over wisdom. Now it would pay the price. As years of siege dragged on, Athena grew weary. She had seen mortals kill and die for causes they no longer remembered. Yet within the chaos, she also saw sparks of brilliance, the cunning of Odysseus, the courage of Achilles, the endurance of Hector. Each embodied a fragment of her ideal. The mind and the heart striving toward meaning even in destruction. At night, she walked the silent fields where armor lay scattered like fallen stars. The bodies of heroes gleamed in moonlight, and the wind whispered through their hair. She felt sorrow for them all, for Greeks and Trojans alike, for both had become instruments of divine correction, pawns in a lesson they did not comprehend. Still, the war must run its course. For wisdom, she knew, is never born in peace. It is forged in the fire of failure, hammered by pain. And through the ruins of Troy, the human race would learn what gods already knew, that pride, once planted, grows like ivy until it strangles the very walls it adorns. Athena turned her gaze toward the city that glittered on the horizon. Its towers shone like polished bronze beneath the stars. Soon, she thought, even that splendor would fade, and from its ashes, new understanding would rise. The olive branches she had planted in Athens swayed in the night wind, their silver leaves reflecting the moon. They were reminders of what she truly sought, not vengeance, but balance. Even in war, her mind remained still as the center of the storm. As dawn broke over the plains of Troy, the sky burned crimson with omen. The gods watched from the heavens, their rivalries mirrored in mortal blood. Athena stood apart, neither rejoicing nor mourning, for she had already seen the end. It would not come through swords, nor through the fury of Ares, but through the quiet brilliance of a single thought, a whisper in the mind of a man whom she had long watched and guided. That man was Odysseus, and through him the city of Troy would fall. The goddess of wisdom, the strategist of war, folded her hands and waited. The lesson had begun, and the world would never be the same. The wrath of the gods at Troy. The war dragged on like an unending storm, its thunder rolling across the plains of Ilium year after year. The olive trees that once shaded the coast had long been reduced to ash, and the cries of the dying mingled with the distant hum of waves upon the Aegean shore. From her high seat upon Olympus, Athena watched with a calm that masked sorrow, for she knew this was no longer a war of men, it was a contest of gods. The air above Troy shimmered with divine presence. On one side stood Athena, Hera, and Poseidon aligned with the Greeks. On the other, Aphrodite, Apollo, and Ares fought for the Trojans. Each battle below was mirrored by unseen struggle above, each mortal decision nudged by immortal whim. The gods, though eternal, could not escape their own pride. Athena's anger was not loud like Ares's roaring fury, nor cruel like Hera's vengeance. It was the anger of order betrayed, of wisdom scorned. Troy had chosen passion over truth, beauty over balance, yet still she felt pity for the mortals caught in divine crossfire. They bled not for their own sins, but for the folly of those who ruled above. On the plains, heroes rose and fell like waves breaking upon stone. Achilles, son of Thetis, burned with wrath so pure it rivaled the sun. His rage was both his weapon and his wound. Athena stood beside him, often, unseen, cooling his fire when it threatened to consume reason itself. When Agamemnon insulted him, and pride blinded his heart, she appeared before him, invisible to all but him, her hand resting gently upon his shoulder. "Hold your spear," she whispered. "Strike not at the king. Words can wound deeper than bronze." And Achilles obeyed. The goddess's calm steadied him, though her restraint would later lead to sorrow beyond measure. When the Trojans advanced under the light of Apollo, their golden god guiding arrows and flame, Athena countered with strategy and insight. She whispered to the Greek captains, sowed plans within Odysseus's mind, and lent her shield to Diomedes. That mortal, favored by her wisdom, once struck even Ares upon the battlefield, piercing the god's side with Athena's guidance. The war paused as Olympus itself shook with his cry. Athena's hand held Diomedes steady as he faced divine wrath. "Courage with thought," she murmured through the clash. "Never passion without purpose." Yet the longer the war stretched, the more the gods' involvement grew reckless. Apollo sent plagues through the Greek camp. Hera manipulated storms. Poseidon raised walls of sea to crush Trojan ships. And through it all, Athena maintained the delicate balance between vengeance and reason. Still, she could not remain untouched. When she saw the Trojans gaining ground, led by Hector noble, brave, bound by honor, she felt both admiration and unease. For Hector was the kind of mortal she cherished, disciplined, loyal, courageous without arrogance. Yet he stood on the wrong side of destiny. One night, as the fires of both armies flickered against the dark, Athena descended to the field. She walked among the corpses, her armor reflecting the pale light of the moon. The scent of smoke and blood hung thick in the air. She knelt beside a fallen soldier, a youth whose face still bore the softness of boyhood. His shield was carved with her owl. He had fought beneath her symbol. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, she touched his brow. "Your courage was pure," she whispered. your cause imperfect, but wisdom will remember you. When dawn came, the gods gathered again upon Olympus. Their quarrels were endless, their pride insatiable. Hera taunted Aphrodite for Troy's losses. Ares accused Athena of deceit. Poseidon thundered with complaint against Zeus's indifference. But Athena's words cut through their noise like the first crack of lightning before rain. "This war is not ours," she said. "It belongs to them. Each life taken, each tear shed, these are lessons, not trophies. Let us not drown in the vanity we claim to punish." Even Zeus fell silent, for though he ruled the heavens, her wisdom pierced deeper than his authority. But prophecy had already bound the course. The fates, those silent weavers beyond even Zeus's command, had already spun the threads of Troy's destruction. Athena could guide, but she could not unmake destiny. When Patroclus fell, slain by Hector while wearing Achilles' armor, Athena felt the tremor of grief ripple through the Greek camp. Achilles' cry rose like thunder over the sea, his rage unstoppable. She knew what was to come. She appeared once more before him, cloaked in mist and moonlight. "Remember," she told him, "vengeance is the fire that consumes its bearer first." But he could not hear her through the storm of his sorrow. He charged, godlike in fury, his spear guided more by grief than strategy. The two greatest warriors of the age met beneath Troy's walls, and when Hector fell, the world seemed to hold its breath. From Olympus, Athena turned away, for though Hector's death was justice by mortal law, it was tragedy by divine measure. She loved humanity too deeply not to mourn its brilliance extinguished. When Achilles later dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, Athena's patience faltered. She descended to the field once more, unseen by men. With a gesture, she shielded the corpse from further desecration, preserving Hector's honor even as Achilles raged. To the goddess, respect for the fallen was not weakness, it was wisdom's final act of mercy. The gods themselves began to tire. The war had devoured everything it touched, cities, hearts, ideals. Yet still Athena's resolve did not waver. She would see it through to its end, not for vengeance, but for understanding. Mortals must learn what happens when desire defies balance, when beauty is chosen over truth. In the 10th year, as the Greeks struggled against exhaustion and despair, Athena turned once more to Odysseus, the one mortal whose mind mirrored her own. He was weary, yet his eyes still burned with thought. To him she appeared in a dream, her voice as soft as the tide. "It is time," she said. "End it not with strength, but with cunning. Let wisdom be your weapon." He woke before dawn, the idea already alive within him, a deception so audacious it would change history. And so, beneath the quiet guidance of the goddess, the plan of the wooden horse was born. Athena stood upon the walls of Olympus, the wind tugging at her golden hair. Below, the armies gathered for one final gambit. Around her, the other gods quarreled still, blind to the deeper truth. The war was never about Troy alone. It was about the soul of mankind, the eternal struggle between mind and desire, reason and pride. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky with blood and bronze, Athena's grey eyes narrowed. She felt the balance shifting, the culmination of every lesson she had tried to teach. Troy's end would be cruel, but necessary, its ruins the soil from which wisdom would grow anew. She whispered to the winds, her words carried across the silent sea. "Let the mind prevail where muscle cannot. Let cunning triumph where chaos reigns. Let this war end, not in glory, but in revelation." And, quote, "And somewhere below, a mortal stirred in his sleep, hearing her voice as the faint murmur of the tide. He rose before dawn and began to build." The goddess watched, silent and still, as wood and thought came together, the birth of a deception, a symbol of divine intellect in mortal hands. Soon, the wrath of gods would fall upon Troy in flame and shadow. Yet beneath that destruction, Athena's true gift waited, Not ruin, but awakening. The wooden horse and Troy's end. The final dawn over Troy broke crimson and slow, as though even the sun hesitated to witness what must come. For 10 long years the war had devoured everything, sons and fathers, kings and beggars, pride and pity alike. The sea was littered with forgotten armour, the air still carried the faint metallic taste of sorrow. The Greeks had grown weary of war, and the Trojans, though weary too, believed themselves enduring enough to survive. Both sides waited for a miracle or for wisdom. That wisdom came not from blade or spear, but from thought. It came from Odysseus of Ithaca, the mortal whose mind mirrored the divine clarity of Athena herself. For many nights, as the Greeks sat beside their cold fires and counted their dead, Athena walked unseen among them. Her steps left no mark, yet her presence stirred every flickering flame. She leaned near Odysseus's tent as he slept, and whispered softly into his dreaming ear. "Win with your mind, not your sword," she breathed. "Let deception be your ally, and silence your weapon." When he woke, the idea was already alive within him, so vivid it seemed less a thought than a memory gifted by the gods. He gathered the captains before him, their faces hollow from years of battle, and spoke quietly of a plan so daring that only those who understood Athena's nature could have believed it possible. They would not take Troy by siege nor by fire, but by invitation. They would leave behind a gift, a great wooden horse, hollow within and vast enough to conceal men. The Greeks would feign retreat, their fleet hidden beyond the horizon. The Trojans, thinking the enemy defeated, would drag the monument into their city as a trophy of victory. But inside, warriors would wait, and when night fell, when the gates were unguarded and the songs of celebration filled the air, they would emerge. To the Greeks, it seemed both madness and genius. But to Athena, watching from Olympus, it was perfection, reason defeating vanity, intellect conquering impulse. She lent her hand to the design, guiding the builder's tools. The wood gleamed in the sun, polished and smooth, its eyes hollow yet strangely alive. Upon its flank, Odysseus inscribed a dedication, "To Athena, for a safe return home." It was an irony that pleased her, her name used as deceit to punish those who once mocked her judgment. When the final nail was struck, Athena breathed a touch of her divine essence into the creation. The horse shimmered faintly in the evening light, not as a living creature, but as an idea incarnate, a vessel of intellect hidden within illusion. The Greeks abandoned their camp, leaving fires smouldering and sand strewn with the debris of departure. Only the giant horse remained, standing solemn and silent before the sea. From the walls of Troy, the people watched in astonishment. The beach that had groaned under armies for a decade now lay empty. The ships were gone, their sails vanished into the morning haze. The Greeks, it seemed, had surrendered, and before the gates, like an offering, stood the magnificent statue. They descended cautiously, led by the aged priest Laocoon, who viewed the gift with suspicion. "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," he warned. His voice carried across the plaza, sharp as a blade. "It is not the will of the gods that we take this into our home. There is trickery here, perhaps even the hand of Athena herself." But the people, hungry for hope after 10 years of dread, did not listen. They saw in the horse a sign of divine favor, a symbol that their suffering had been rewarded. Even the prophetess Cassandra, cursed by Apollo to speak truth but never be believed, cried out that ruin hid within the gift. Her warnings echoed across the stone courtyards, unheard. To silence doubt, Laocoon took a spear and hurled it against the horse's side. The point struck wood, and a hollow sound reverberated through its frame, deep and metallic, like the toll of a distant bell. Inside, the hidden Greeks froze, hearts pounding. But before suspicion could spread, the gods intervened. From the sea rose 2 monstrous serpents, crimson and scaled like molten rock. They slithered across the sands, eyes burning, and coiled around Laocoon and his sons. Their screams pierced the sky as the serpents crushed them, then slithered toward Athena's temple and vanished. The Trojans, horrified, took it as a sign that the goddess had avenged an impious act. To question the horse now was to defy her. And so, with music and joy, they opened the gates and dragged the monument into their city. The streets filled with laughter, with the sound of flutes and the scent of burning myrrh. Children danced beside the wheels, and women wove garlands of flowers to crown the wooden steed. All of Troy moved as one, blind to the stillness of the night to come. When evening fell, Athena stood upon the walls of Olympus, her gaze fixed on the city below. She saw its towers glimmer with firelight, its people drinking and singing beneath her image carved in marble. Once, she might have pitied them. But pity was no longer mercy. Their blindness had been chosen, not imposed. The lesson had been written. Now it would be read. Midnight came. The fires of celebration burned low. Troy slept. Then, in the stillness, the horse stirred. A panel at its side fell open, and Odysseus emerged into the moonlight, his face pale and cold. Behind him followed Menelaus, Neoptolemus, and the silent shadows of Greece's finest warriors. The streets below lay deserted, the gates unguarded. Athena's owl cried once from the temple roof, a signal, a benediction, and a judgment. The Greeks moved like ghosts through the sleeping city. They opened the gates to the sea, where the fleet hidden all along returned beneath the cover of darkness. Torches flared, the night erupted in fire. The Trojans woke to screams and smoke. From the citadel to the shore, flames devoured the city. Warriors poured through the streets, their blades glinting red. The temples fell, their statues shattering upon the marble floors. Priam, the aged king, clung to the altar of Zeus, only to be cut down before the very eyes of the gods he had served. Amid the chaos, Athena descended, her armor shining like dawn through smoke. She walked unseen among the ruins, her face calm, her gaze steady. She did not revel in the destruction. She observed it as a teacher might watch a pupil's final lesson unfold. She saw Aphrodite's tears as her son Aeneas fled, carrying his father. She saw Hera's satisfaction as the flames rose higher. She saw Poseidon shaking the earth beneath the crumbling walls. Yet her eyes held no triumph, only truth, for she knew this was not victory. It was consequence. The Trojans, who had once crowned Aphrodite's beauty above Athena's wisdom, now burned by that same beauty's deceit. The Greeks, who had followed her cunning, would soon suffer for their arrogance as well. For wisdom granted without humility leads not to peace, but to exile. When the last tower fell, the sound echoed across the sea like the closing of a great book. Athena turned away, the glow of the fires reflected in her armor. She climbed once more to the heights of Olympus, where the other gods feasted on the smoke of destruction. Hera toasted the fall of Troy, Aphrodite wept, and Zeus stared into the flames, silent. Athena alone did not sit. She stood apart, her expression unreadable. "It is done," she said softly. "But their suffering is not over. The war was not the end. It is the beginning of understanding." In the years that followed, those words proved true. The Greeks, triumphant, set sail for home, but none returned unscarred. Storms scattered their ships, some were wrecked, some cursed by the gods they had offended. Even Odysseus, her favoured mortal, would wander for 10 long years before finding peace. The goddess of wisdom had not spared them. She had only ensured that each would learn what Troy could not, that no victory bought by deceit comes without a price. Below, Troy smouldered for days, its ruins black against the dawn. From the ashes, survivors wandered Aeneas among them, carrying with them the seed of future civilizations. Through their exile, Athena saw the faint glimmer of redemption, wisdom carried forward through loss. The war of gods had ended, but the story of man had only begun. In the silence after ruin, Athena's voice still lingered on the wind, a whisper over broken stones, over the dying embers of Troy. From arrogance comes ruin. From ruin, understanding. From understanding, peace. The olive leaves of distant Athens swayed in that same wind, their silver shimmer catching the newborn light of day. For while Troy's fires faded, Athena's city endured, its foundations built upon the lesson she had long tried to teach. The wooden horse stood no more. The walls of Troy lay in dust, but within the minds of men, those fragile, aspiring, restless minds, the image of that hollow monument remained, eternal and haunting. It was not merely a symbol of deception, but of thought itself, that wisdom, once turned toward pride, can destroy even the mightiest of cities. Athena, standing on the edge of Olympus, watched the smoke trail toward the stars. Her grey eyes, calm and infinite, reflected both grief and acceptance, for she knew that even gods cannot save mortals from the lessons they must learn themselves. Yet beneath the quiet sorrow, a faint hope glowed. Somewhere, she thought, wisdom would take root again, perhaps in her city of Athens, perhaps in the heart of some poet yet unborn. The firelight dimmed, the sea whispered its eternal rhythm, and the goddess turned away from the ruins of Troy. The war was over. The age of enlightenment had begun, the Odyssey and the wandering hero. When the fires of Troy faded into the horizon and the smoke thinned into ghosts against the dawn, the Greeks set sail, carrying home both victory and curse. The air smelled of salt and grief, and in the hearts of every returning warrior lived a shadow, the awareness that the gods had not finished with them. For none had emerged from that decade unscathed. They had won the war, but they had lost the favour of heaven. Among them sailed Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the mind behind the wooden horse, the mortal whose cunning had turned Athena's whisper into history. Of all men, he was dearest to her, not for his strength, but for his balance of thought and daring. Yet even he, the most favoured, would be tested beyond imagination. For the goddess of wisdom does not grant peace lightly. She shapes it through endurance. The sea was calm when he first departed, the oars striking rhythm into the morning light. His men laughed, their armour gleaming, their spirits high. They dreamed of hearth and family, of fields untended for too long. But Athena knew the truth. Home was not a place to which one simply returned. It was something to be earned through struggle, through humility, through wisdom learned anew. Zeus had decreed that no mortal should leave Troy unjudged. Poseidon, enraged that his son Polyphemus had been blinded by Odysseus's hand, stirred the sea into fury. The waves rose like mountains. The sky cracked with lightning. Athena watched from the heights of Olympus, her face calm yet burdened. Though she loved Odysseus, she could not unmake the will of fate. Instead, she became his unseen companion, shaping his trials into lessons, his pain into understanding. The first island they reached was the land of the lotus eaters, where the air shimmered with sweetness and forgetfulness. His men, tasting the fruit, fell into blissful oblivion, their eyes dull with dreams. Athena whispered to Odysseus's heart, reminding him of purpose. "Wake them," she said, "for memory is the seed of wisdom. To forget is to lose the path entirely." He dragged his men from the island, their protests soft as sleep. The ships moved on, their sails dark against the rising sun. Then came the land of the Cyclopes, where crude giants lived without law or craft. There Odysseus met Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, a creature of raw power and hunger, whose single eye burned like a forge. Odysseus, guided by Athena's intelligence, devised a plan. He told the monster his name was Nobody, plied him with wine, and when the giant slept, drove a sharpened stake into his eye. The roar shook the cliffs, and the blinded beast groped helplessly, calling for vengeance. When the ship finally slipped away into the dawn, Odysseus's pride flared. He stood upon the stern and shouted back, revealing his true name. "It is I, Odysseus of Ithaca, who blinded you. Athena, watching from the wind, felt a chill of sorrow. Even the wise, she murmured, are fools when victory blinds them. For in that cry, Odysseus sealed his own suffering. Poseidon heard, and his rage became the sea itself. The storms that followed scattered the fleet. Men were lost to waves and monsters, to the lure of false havens and the greed of strange lands. Each island became a mirror of human nature, greed upon Aeolia, gluttony among the Laestrygonians, temptation in Circe's hall. The goddess watched and waited. She did not save him from each danger, for wisdom cannot be given, it must be discovered. Years passed like drifting clouds. The world forgot the hero who had once felled Troy, but Athena did not. She saw him weep upon lonely shores, his heart torn between despair and endurance. When he dwelled upon Calypso's island, ensnared by immortal comfort, she stirred his longing for home. "Do not mistake rest for peace," she whispered. "Peace is not the absence of struggle, but its resolution. If you wand to Billy's reside." At last, with Zeus's permission, she descended once more in mortal guise. The goddess of wisdom stood upon the beach where Odysseus sat, her cloak shimmering with sea mist, her eyes clear and calm. He did not recognize her, but his spirit stirred. She guided him to build a raft and sail once more. Poseidon sent his storms again, and Athena deflected each wave, her invisible hands steadying the timbers. He drifted to the shores of Phaeacia, where Nausicaa, the young princess, found him battered yet unbroken. There, Athena's work took subtler form. She wrapped him in grace and eloquence, so that when he spoke, even kings listened. Through diplomacy, not force, he found aid and passage home. It was her way to teach that intellect and persuasion often achieve what strength cannot. When at last the shores of Ithaca rose from the mist, Athena's heart softened. 20 years had passed since his departure. His home lay silent, his halls overrun with suitors feasting upon his wealth, courting his faithful wife, Penelope. His son, Telemachus, grown without a father's hand, searched for a figure he barely remembered. Yet even now, the goddess did not grant Odysseus a simple return. She cloaked him in disguise as an old beggar, testing not his power, but his patience. She guided Telemachus too, stirring courage in the young man's chest. "Wisdom," she whispered, "is the inheritance of those who question the world." In that moment, father and son began to mirror the bond between Athena and the mortals she loved, a bond not of command, but of understanding. Inside the halls of Ithaca, Odysseus moved unseen among the arrogant suitors. Athena stood beside him, invisible but near, her grey eyes gleaming with pride. She steadied his anger, for wrath would have undone him before truth could be revealed. "Wait," she murmured, "and when you strike, let it be with purpose, not passion." At last, the bow was brought forth, the weapon only Odysseus could bend. The suitors mocked the old beggar, their laughter echoing through the marble hall. But Athena's hand rested upon his shoulder, and with calm breath he strung the bow in a single motion. The strings sang like destiny. In that sound, every trial, every sorrow, every whisper of the goddess culminated in one act of clarity. The arrow flew, the hall fell silent. When the final suitor fell, and the echo of vengeance faded, Odysseus stood amid ruin and silence. Penelope, ever wise, tested him, still asking of secrets only her true husband could know. And when he answered, not with pride but with gentleness, she embraced him. In that moment, Athena smiled, for he had learned at last the balance she had always sought to teach, that cunning without humility leads to ruin, but intellect tempered by compassion brings peace. The years of wandering had stripped him of arrogance, leaving wisdom in its place. And though his trials had been many, they were not punishment, they were refinement. Athena, unseen, stepped outside the palace and looked across the calm sea. The moon shimmered on the water like a silver shield. She thought of Troy's burning towers, of the folly of gods, of the endurance of mortals. It was always the same cycle: war and pride, loss and revelation, but each turn brought humanity closer to understanding. She whispered into the night, her voice carried upon the wind that brushed the olive trees. "You have come home not because you are strong, Odysseus, but because you have learned." The waves lapped against the shore, soft and rhythmic. From her temple on the Acropolis far away, an owl called out across the darkness, a sound of completion, of wisdom fulfilled. Yet even as peace settled over Ithaca, Athena's work was never done. She knew that wisdom was not a final destination, but an endless voyage. Every mortal life was an odyssey, each filled with storms, illusions, and moments of grace. Her purpose was to guide them all, unseen but constant, from blindness toward truth. She turned once more toward Olympus, her heart neither heavy nor light. In her eyes burned the reflection of human resilience, the spark she had nurtured since the dawn of thought. And as she ascended into the stars, her voice lingered upon the world. Between cunning and conscience lies understanding. Between journey and home lies wisdom. Thus ended the wandering of Odysseus, and thus continued the quiet dominion of Athena, the goddess who never slept, whose watchful gaze still guarded the fragile balance between reason and desire, between the sea of chaos and the shores of peace. Athena and the rise of Athens. When Odysseus's sails disappeared beyond the horizon and the songs of the Homeric age faded into echo, the world beneath Olympus changed. The long silence of war gave way to the murmurs of civilization. The fires of conquest cooled into the glow of hearths, and from that warmth, the first philosophers began to dream. The goddess who had watched over heroes and warriors turned her gaze now toward builders, thinkers, and poets. Athena's era of blood and bronze transformed into an age of marble and reason. It was in her city Athens that this transformation took form. The olive trees she had gifted centuries earlier grew into groves that shimmered like silver seas across the Attic hills. Beneath their branches, shepherds debated justice, sculptors studied symmetry, and children learned not the songs of war, but the rhythm of thought. The goddess had triumphed, not by spear or flame, but by patience. What began with a contest against Poseidon had become the soul of an entire people. At dawn, the light over the Acropolis was unlike anywhere else in the world. It was said that Athena herself shaped the air there, clear, golden, lucid. Travelers who approached from the sea saw the rock rising from the earth like the pedestal of heaven, its surface crowned with temples that gleamed as if lit from within. Atop it stood her great image, carved by Phidias, towering and calm. Her spear caught the morning sun, her shield reflected the sea. Even ships miles away could glimpse that glint and feel reassured, as if the goddess herself were watching their passage. But the beauty of Athens was not in its stones alone. It was in its people, who carried Athena's essence in their way of life. They revered wisdom as others revered war, and their daily acts were offerings to her. The craftsman at his workbench, the teacher beneath the olive tree, the citizen in council, each was her disciple. Her temple might hold her statue, but her true dwelling was in the mind of the city itself. Athena inspired them not with miracles, but with questions. She whispered to their thinkers, men like Solon, who shaped laws with reason instead of vengeance, and later to Socrates, who turned wisdom inward and taught that the unexamined life was no life at all. In their restless pursuit of knowledge, she heard the echo of her own divine purpose, the belief that enlightenment was not a gift from the gods, but a responsibility of humanity. In the agora, where merchants shouted and philosophers argued, Athena's presence was everywhere. The people traded ideas as freely as they traded goods. Debate became sacred ritual. Even the humblest potter or fishmonger would pause to listen when wisdom walked by in the form of a teacher or poet. The air was thick with curiosity, the very breath of the goddess. The Athenians built theatres as grand as temples. where actors performed stories of tragedy and triumph, reminding all who watched that hubris leads always to downfall. The goddess of wisdom smiled upon these plays, for they were her lessons given human voice. The myths of Arachne, of Perseus, of Odysseus, all were told anew, not as mere tales of wonder, but as reflections of truth. The stage became a mirror of the soul, and in its reflection, Athena saw herself. Even in warfare, Athens followed her example. When enemies threatened the city, its generals did not rush blindly into bloodshed. They planned, calculated, strategized, each campaign an act of reasoned defense, not rage. The walls of Themistocles, built with foresight, shielded them from Persian invasion. The ships at Salamis, guided by intellect and courage alike, turned back an empire. As the Greeks fought upon the sea, it was said that Athena herself walked the decks, her cloak shimmering like starlight upon the waves. After the victory, the Athenians did not raise statues of kings. They raised temples to their goddess, the Parthenon, most of all. It began as a vision among architects and sculptors who sought to honor her not through flattery, but through perfection. Under Pericles, the city became her living monument. Marble from Mount Pentelicus was quarried and hauled by hand, shaped by tools that hummed like hymns. Every column, every frieze, every curve was measured not for splendor, but for harmony, the physical embodiment of thought made form. When it was completed, the Parthenon gleamed like dawn incarnate. Within it stood the colossal statue of Athena Parthenos, gold and ivory, serene and unshakable. She held in her hand a smaller figure of Nike, the spirit of victory, not as triumph, but as grace. Her eyes, carved with such depth that they seemed to follow the viewer, spoke without sound, that wisdom and power, when united, create beauty eternal. The citizens gathered beneath her gaze and marveled. The temple was not merely a house for a god, it was a sanctuary for the human spirit, a promise that reason, discipline, and imagination could touch the divine. Athena's soul was now carved into the skyline, her ideals etched into stone. But for all her serenity, the goddess knew that even enlightenment carried shadows. Pride, that old enemy, had merely changed its shape. It no longer roared in battlefields. It whispered in academies and courts. She watched as the city that bore her name grew wealthy and proud. Scholars debated until their truths turned brittle. Politicians spoke of justice but sought their own glory. Artists sculpted her likeness, not in reverence, but in vanity. Athena did not rage. She had seen this cycle before. She understood that wisdom, like the olive tree, must weather drought and storm. She walked unseen through the streets of Athens, her sandals brushing dust and marble alike. In the laughter of students, in the quiet persistence of artisans, in the solitary prayers of philosophers, she still found her purpose. When plague swept through the city and Pericles fell, she watched with heavy heart. The people's faith wavered, their temples filled with fear instead of devotion. Yet even in despair, Athena's presence endured. In the writings of historians who sought to understand, in the mathematicians who measured the stars to find order amid chaos, she lived on. The goddess of wisdom does not vanish. When her people fall into doubt, she grows quieter, waiting for them to listen again. So she waited, and in time, new voices rose. Plato built his academy, where thought itself became sacred ritual. Aristotle followed, weaving logic into the fabric of nature. In every word they wrote, Athena's spirit moved the eternal conversation between mortal curiosity and divine understanding. They spoke of ideals, of virtue, of the soul's pursuit of truth. They called it philosophy, but it was prayer by another name. As the centuries turned, Athens became not just a city, but an idea, an enduring reflection of the goddess who birthed it. Empires would rise and fall, conquerors would come and go, yet her wisdom would outlive them all. Even as marble crumbled and temples faded, the mind she awakened in her people would never sleep again. From that spark, civilization spread across continents. The language of Athens became the foundation of knowledge, its art the model of beauty, its law the compass of justice. Athena had won a victory greater than any war. She had taught mortals to think for themselves. On quiet nights, when the moon shone over the Acropolis and the air hummed with cicadas, her spirit still walked among the ruins. Travelers claimed to feel her presence there, a calm that silenced even the wind. Some said that if one stood beneath the olive tree said to have grown from her spear, they could hear the faint rustle of her voice, not words, but the pulse of thought itself. Her city endured through centuries of change, through Rome's dominion, through the dark of empire and the light of rebirth. And even when her name was whispered in forgotten languages, she was never gone. For Athena was not bound to statues or shrines. She was the whisper of logic in chaos, the glimmer of reason in despair, the quiet dignity of humanity striving toward understanding. The rise of Athens was not the triumph of one people, it was the awakening of the human mind. And though the gods would fade, her light would remain, carried in the hearts of all who sought wisdom. As the night deepened over Greece, the stars reflected on the marble of her temple like tears. Yet they were not tears of mourning, they were of fulfillment. The goddess of wisdom looked upon her city and saw at last what she had always intended. Not worship, but enlightenment. And so, she turned her gaze to the wider world, her grey eyes reflecting both dawn and dusk. The olive leaves swayed in the night breeze, whispering the promise she had given long ago, that knowledge, once planted, would never die. The Parthenon and her image in stone. At the height of Athens's glory, when marble glowed like sunlight made solid and the hum of philosophy filled the air, the city turned its full devotion toward the goddess who had given it life. The wars were ended, the arts flourished, and wisdom reigned in the agora like a living current. And from that current arose a single vision, an act of creation that would unite the mortal and the divine in one eternal form. The Parthenon, high upon the Acropolis, where the first olive tree had sprung from Athena's spear. Builders and sculptors laboured day after day, year after year. Their hands were steady, their hearts reverent. They worked not to please kings, but to honour perfection. Every block of marble carried meaning. Every curve obeyed harmony. It was not merely a temple, it was a philosophy carved in stone. Athena watched from above, her eyes like still grey seas. She felt the rhythm of chisels, the hum of tools, the breath of dust rising toward the sky. The sound of creation, to her, was music, the mortal echo of divine thought. The Parthenon was not her demand, but their gift, a collective act of gratitude and intellect. Phidias, the greatest sculptor of his age, led them. Guided by both genius and reverence, he imagined her form as no human ever had. She would not stand distant or untouchable, but radiant, calm, and sovereign. He saw her as both warrior and teacher, strength wrapped in serenity. When he closed his eyes to pray before beginning, he whispered, "Goddess, guide my hand, that I may show men not what you are, but what wisdom looks like when shaped by faith." Athena heard. Years passed as the temple rose, each column angled imperceptibly inward so that the structure appeared flawless to the human eye. The masons said that even imperfection must serve harmony, for Athena's world was one where geometry and soul intertwined. When the last stone was laid, the sunlight broke across the marble, and the temple seemed to breathe. The people stood in silence, tears shining in their eyes, for they felt her presence in every gleaming surface. Inside, Phidias completed his masterpiece, the colossal statue of Athena Parthenos. She stood nearly 40 feet tall, gold and ivory gleaming beneath the torchlight. Her eyes, made of precious stone, caught the light and seemed alive. In one hand, she held a figure of Nike, the spirit of victory, delicate and weightless. as if it might take flight. In the other, her spear touched the ground beside her shield, upon which the head of Medusa glimmered like captured lightning. When the veil was first lifted, a hush fell over the crowd. Even the priests stood breathless. The goddess appeared not as a distant deity, but as a mirror of the human soul at its highest discipline, without cruelty, beauty without vanity, wisdom without pride. Outside, the Parthenon gleamed in the sun like the summit of human endeavor. Travelers from distant lands came to behold it, calling it the House of Reason. The columns framed the sky like a doorway between earth and heaven. When the wind passed through, it carried the low hum of balance, as if the building itself were singing her name. But Athena, though honored, did not bask in the praise. She saw in this monument both devotion and danger, for she knew that every act of greatness contains within it the seed of pride. And pride, once watered, grows swiftly. She descended in silence one night, walking the marble steps of her own temple. The moonlight poured across the city like silver water. She paused before her statue and studied her likeness, the serene face, the lifted spear, the calm dominion. It was magnificent, yes, but incomplete. "They see me in form," she murmured, "but not yet in spirit. For stone cannot teach what must be lived." Her gaze drifted to the city below. The streets glowed with torchlight. Philosophers argued in courtyards. Artisans crafted their wonders. Citizens debated law and virtue. To the goddess, this noise was sacred, a living hymn to her gift. Yet she sensed a tremor in the harmony, a faint discord. Wealth had followed wisdom, and ambition had followed wealth. The people of Athens, her chosen, began to measure worth not by thought, but by reputation. Their brilliance gleamed like gold leaf, radiant but thin. Still, she did not turn away. For wisdom, she knew, grows stronger in adversity. She whispered to those who would listen, the quiet ones, the seekers, the doubters. To them she sent dreams of truth, visions of justice, questions that pierced illusion. The Parthenon might be her temple, but the mind was her altar, and in that invisible temple she remained eternal. The Parthenon became more than a place of worship. It became a symbol of civilization itself. Festivals were held in her honor, the Panathenea, where processions wound through the city, carrying robes woven for the goddess, their golden threads shimmering like dawn. Musicians played, poets recited, athletes competed, and artisans displayed their finest craft. Each act of excellence, each pursuit of perfection, was an offering. Even the olive oil used to anoint the victors was sacred, drawn from the grove said to descend from her original tree. The scent filled the air during those days of celebration, a perfume of gratitude that reached even Olympus. And yet, the goddess remained unseen, her calm presence woven into every act of thought. When philosophers debated virtue in the agora, they invoked her name not as superstition, but as inspiration. When sculptors carved faces of mortals filled with serenity and reason, they sought her ideal. She had become not only a goddess, but a concept, the living embodiment of clarity and justice. Centuries passed, and the world shifted around her. The rise of empires brought both glory and ruin to the city that bore her name. Rome came, reverent yet possessive, carrying away her treasures and her forms, but never her spirit. The Parthenon stood still, battered but proud, its marble glowing through centuries of storm. Athena watched, unchanged by time. She saw her temple turned to other faiths, her name replaced on the lips of men. Yet she never vanished, for ideas cannot be destroyed. When a scholar unrolled a scroll in Alexandria, when a painter in Florence sought the balance of light and form, when a thinker in distant lands questioned the nature of truth, she was there. Through the ages, her image in stone became the blueprint for beauty. Her calm symmetry, her poised strength, her reflective gaze, they shaped cathedrals, palaces, and sculptures across civilizations. Even when her name was forgotten, her essence endured. For every builder who sought proportion, every artist who sought meaning, Every philosopher who sought order, all followed her path unknowingly. The Parthenon weathered earthquakes, fire, conquest, and time. Its columns cracked, its statues fell, yet its spirit refused to fade. The olive tree beside it grew and grew, its roots gripping the same sacred rock. Travellers still climbed the hill to stand before the ruins, and there, amid the broken marble and wind, they felt something eternal. They could not name it, but it was her. The goddess of wisdom had long since left Olympus, but she had never left humanity. Her temple of stone was only the first layer of her shrine. Beneath it, in every mind that seeks understanding, she lives still. Her likeness may crumble, but her reflection remains in thought, in art, in the endless striving for harmony. And when the sun sets over the Acropolis and the marble blushes gold, the air seems to shimmer with her breath. For Athena, carved in stone but alive in spirit, is not merely a memory of gods. She is the unending promise that knowledge and beauty, once joined, can make the mortal eternal. Trials of the mind, the birth of law. When the festivals faded and the olive smoke drifted from the Acropolis, there came a time when the city that bore Athena's name was tested not by war or plague, but by the turmoil of its own conscience. For even in an age guided by wisdom, there is no greater challenge than justice itself. Athens, the city of thought, grew vast and complex. Citizens debated in crowded forums, orators filled the air with their eloquence, and laws multiplied like roots beneath the soil. Yet beneath this brilliance simmered chaos. Revenge still whispered through alleyways, and pride still burned in the hearts of men. The old blood feuds of the ancient world had not died. They had merely hidden beneath the marble face of civilization. Athena, ever watchful, saw it all. She knew that wisdom without justice is an empty song, and that reason must learn to speak in the voice of fairness. Thus began her quiet labor to turn vengeance into law, passion into principle, chaos into order. It started with a murder. Orestes, son of Agamemnon, returned to his homeland of Mycenae to find his father slain by his mother, Clytemnestra. Bound by duty to avenge him, Orestes killed her in turn. The act was both justice and crime, a paradox that divided the world. The Furies, the ancient spirits of vengeance, older than Olympus itself, rose from the shadows to pursue him. Their eyes blazed, their cries echoed through the earth. They were the embodiment of the old law, blood for blood, pain for pain. Orestes fled across Greece, haunted by their shrieks. No temple would shelter him, no priest would absolve him. In despair, he knelt before Athena's altar and cried out for mercy. "Goddess of wisdom," he pleaded, "teach me what justice is. If vengeance is no longer enough." Athena heard. She descended from Olympus, her armor shining not for battle, but for judgment. She looked upon Orestes not as sinner or saint, but as man, bound by the weight of his choices. "Rise," she said gently. "Your guilt is not for gods to decree, but for men to understand. The age of endless retribution is over. Let reason speak where wrath once ruled." With that, she gathered 12 citizens of Athens and formed the first court of law, the Areopagus, the hill of Ares. It was there, beneath the open sky, that mortals would weigh guilt and innocence, guided by evidence, not by bloodlust. The trial began at dusk. The Furies stood to accuse, their hair writhing with serpents, their voices like the hiss of old wounds. "He has spilled his mother's blood," they cried. "No law can cleanse that sin. Let him suffer as all who kill must suffer." Orestes trembled, yet spoke with courage. "I avenged my father's murder," he said. "Is it justice to kill a killer? If I am damned, then all justice is a circle of fire with no end." The citizens listened, torn between fear of the Furies and reverence for Athena. At last, the goddess herself rose to speak. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of dawn. "This is the birth of reason," she said. From this day vengeance shall bow before judgment. The old ways must yield to the new. She called for the jurors to cast their votes, pebbles dropped into bronze urns, the sound of destiny taking shape. When the count was even, Athena placed her own stone into the urn of mercy. If there is balance, she said, let compassion tip the scale. It's mine. The verdict was given. Orestes was acquitted. The Furies howled, their ancient law broken. But Athena turned to them and spoke not with command, but with invitation. Your time is not over, she said. You shall become the Eumenides, the kindly ones. Protect the innocent, guide the hearts of men, but let reason rule your fury. And so the goddesses of vengeance were transformed. Their wrath softened into guardianship. Their cries became songs of warning, not of doom. The earth trembled, not in anger, but in renewal. A new order was born, the law that speaks, the law that listens. From that day onward, Athens became the cradle of justice. The Areopagus stood as sacred ground, where disputes were settled by reason, not retribution. Men who once reached for swords reached now for words. The goddess of wisdom had achieved her greatest victory not in war, but in thought. She did not boast. She simply stood beneath the moonlight and watched her people learn. The jurors dispersed, their hearts heavy but enlightened. The Furies faded into the night, their hissing replaced by the murmur of the wind through olive leaves. Orestes bowed before Athena and whispered, "You have given men something greater than freedom. You have given them conscience." The goddess smiled faintly. "Conscience," she said, "is freedom's truest form." In time, the memory of that trial became legend, but the idea endured, spreading far beyond Athens. Cities across Greece began to follow her model. Kings humbled themselves before councils. Laws grew from her seed, each one a tribute to that moment when the goddess taught humanity to think before it punished. The Parthenon itself became a symbol of that new justice, its perfect geometry, a reflection of the balance between reason and mercy. Within its shadow, poets spoke of moral order, philosophers debated virtue, and citizens learned that wisdom must walk hand in hand with empathy. Athena watched from her high temple, her grey eyes reflecting both the brightness of progress and the shadow of what it cost. For law, though just, could never erase pain entirely. It could only guide it toward meaning. Yet even this limitation was sacred. For wisdom is not omnipotence, it is restraint. The goddess understood that perfection is not the absence of error, but the willingness to correct it. She saw her people falter, argue, even misuse the laws she had inspired, but she did not intervene. She had given them thought. Now they must learn responsibility. At night, the Acropolis shimmered with torchlight. The city below murmured like a living being. Athena's statue cast long shadows across the marble floor, and in those shadows one could almost hear her voice. Seek balance in all things. When wrath tempts you, remember mercy. When fear blinds you, remember truth. The trial of Orestes became more than myth, it became a parable of civilization itself. It marked the moment when the gods withdrew their hand from mortal punishment, trusting humanity to govern its own heart. The world had shifted, subtly but forever, and as centuries passed, each courtroom, each philosopher's desk, each debate beneath an olive tree echoed that same divine whisper: justice, reason, compassion, three faces of one eternal goddess. Athena no longer needed to descend among mortals to be seen. She lived now in every act of fairness, every law written with care, every soul brave enough to question cruelty. Her city had grown beyond her image in stone, it had become her reflection in spirit. The night wind moved softly across the Parthenon, carrying the scent of olive oil and marble dust. Beneath the stars, the goddess of wisdom stood unseen among her people, her voice a gentle murmur in the still air. Law was born when mercy learned to speak. Let it never fall silent. This so 12 various blang, the shadows of hubris. The Parthenon gleamed beneath the rising sun, but Athena, from her silent height above the world, could already sense the tremor in its radiance. What had begun as harmony was shifting, ever so slightly, into dissonance. The people she had guided, her beloved Athenians, had learned much. They had built beauty beyond measure, written philosophy, and turned justice into art. But in the mirror of their own perfection, they began to fall in love with their reflection. Hubris, the ancient enemy of wisdom, was stirring once again. It came softly at first, like the distant murmur of thunder beyond a clear horizon. The artists, whose hands had once carved in reverence, now sought to outdo one another. The philosophers, who had once questioned in humility, began to speak as if they themselves were gods. The statesmen, whose duty had been to serve, found pleasure in hearing their names echo through the marketplace. Athena watched, sorrow building like mist in her chest. She had seen this before among gods, among mortals. In every age, knowledge, like fire, could illuminate or consume. The same mind that invents justice can justify cruelty. The same reason that builds temples can also build empires. When Athens reached the height of its glory, its ships filled the Aegean, its words shaped the thoughts of nations. The city of wisdom became the envy of the world. But envy breeds arrogance, and arrogance blinds even the wise. The goddess saw the signs as clearly as she once saw the omens of war. Boastful speeches, the hunger for dominance disguised as virtue, the forgetfulness of gratitude. She walked among them in disguise, cloaked as a traveller, a teacher, a beggar. Few recognized her, though some felt unease when her grey eyes met theirs. In the streets, she heard the people boast that Athens was eternal, that no power could ever challenge its intellect or might. Their confidence, once noble, had curdled into pride. Athena did not raise her hand in wrath. She was not Hera, who punished through jealousy, nor Poseidon, who shattered with storms. Her retribution, when it came, was the quiet correction of truth. She knew that hubris contains its own undoing. It began with war, the Peloponnesian War, a conflict born not of need, but of ego. Sparta, grim and disciplined, rose to challenge Athens' shining dominion. The goddess watched her children tear themselves apart. The speeches of Pericles, once noble, now trembled with the desperation of a man defending not justice, but pride. The people, drunk on their own brilliance, refused to listen to the warnings of caution. As ships burned and cities fell, Athena felt her olive groves blacken beneath the smoke. The air that had once carried laughter now rang with the cries of the dying. The plague swept through Athens, and Pericles himself perished beneath its fever. Still, the people fought, unwilling to bend. They called upon her name, but not for wisdom, for victory. She did not answer. For how can wisdom dwell where arrogance has built its throne? Years of blood followed. The once golden city grew weary and thin, its walls crumbling, its treasury empty. The goddess of reason stood helpless, for she could not force understanding upon those who refused to see. She watched as Athens, the city of her heart, surrendered not to Sparta, but to its own blindness. And yet, even in ruin, the flame of thought flickered on. Socrates walked among the rubble, barefoot and calm, questioning, listening, refusing despair. When others saw defeat, he saw only the necessity of truth. The unexamined life, he said, is not worth living. Athena heard those words and felt the faintest smile touch her lips. One spark remained, but even that spark drew envy and fear. The city, ashamed of its defeat, turned against its own conscience. The same democracy that Athena had inspired condemned Socrates to death for his ideas. The goddess descended that day to the prison where he waited, unseen but near. He sat calmly, cup of hemlock in hand, speaking to his students. "Do not weep," he told them. The body may perish, but the soul, guided by reason, will ascend. Athena reached out, her invisible fingers brushing his shoulder. "You are my true son," she whispered, though he could not hear, "for you have understood that wisdom and virtue are one." When he drank, she closed her eyes. The silence that followed was deeper than mourning. It was the hush before revelation. From his death, she knew, new generations would rise. His words would not vanish. They would echo through time, like the sound of her spear striking Zeus's skull at her birth, an act of pain that birthed understanding. Still, Athena grieved. She walked again through the streets of her city, once radiant, now subdued. The Parthenon still stood, but its gold had dulled, its glory dimmed. The olive trees still swayed, but their leaves whispered of loss. She knew that wisdom, like nature, must follow its seasons. Growth, bloom, decay, renewal. Even gods must accept the rhythm. In that quiet age of sorrow, Athena's presence became gentler. No longer the guiding voice of victory, she became the whisper of endurance. She inspired those who rebuilt, those who wrote, those who questioned. She watched as Plato recorded his teacher's dialogues, as Aristotle sought order in the stars, as young minds once again turned toward the eternal. The city had fallen, but its spirit endured. Hubris had taken its toll, but from the ashes of arrogance rose humility. Athens learned, painfully, that greatness is not measured by conquest or acclaim, but by the courage to seek truth even in ruin. Athena understood this lesson well. She, too, had once been proud. She remembered the contest with Poseidon, the punishment of Arachne, the wrath she had felt toward Troy. Wisdom, she realized, was not the absence of error, but the transformation of it. Even the goddess of reason must learn compassion through sorrow. As the centuries turned, she no longer appeared as warrior or judge. Her armor grew lighter, her presence softer. She became the muse of reflection, the guardian of quiet thought. Her temple stood empty but alive, its silence filled with memory. Travelers who climbed the Acropolis spoke of feeling peace there, as if the stones themselves remembered balance. At twilight, when the last light kissed the marble and the air turned gold, Athena stood unseen beside her statue. The face carved by Phidias seemed to gaze back at her not as idol, but as mirror. "You are what they needed me to be," she whispered. "Now they must become what I taught them to seek." Braces calmer, the olive tree rustled beside her, its leaves gleaming like tiny shields in the fading sun. She reached out and touched its bark, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her hand. "Even after fire," she said softly, "you grow again." The night settled over Athens, calm and eternal. The city would rise and fall again through empires and ages, but its spirit, her spirit, would not fade. For even when mortals forget the goddess, they cannot forget what she gave them: the power to think, to question, to understand. And as the stars emerged one by one over the darkened Parthenon, Athena's eyes lifted to the heavens. She saw there not the vanity of gods, but the quiet persistence of creation, the endless cycle of thought renewing itself through time. Athena, beyond Greece. The centuries moved as quietly as the tide. Empires rose, fell, and were swallowed by the sands of memory. Yet through every storm of time, Athena's presence lingered unseen but enduring, like a star veiled by clouds. Her temples cracked and her worship faded, but her essence lived on in the fabric of human thought. The goddess who had once spoken through oracles and omens now spoke through reason itself. The Romans called her Minerva. They built shrines in her name, crowned her with laurels, and carved her into their coins. In their libraries and courts, her likeness stood beside their laws. To generals, she was discipline. To lawmakers, prudence. To philosophers, intellect given form. Her gaze, cold and steady in bronze, seemed to watch them as they debated in marble halls, reminding them that victory without order was ruin, and logic without compassion was emptiness. She did not speak to them as she had to the Greeks. Her voice, once melodic and near, became quieter, refined to intuition, to sudden understanding, to the spark that lights when the mind finds truth. When a senator weighed mercy over vengeance, she was there. When an architect found symmetry in chaos, she guided his hand. As Rome conquered the known world, Athena watched its hunger for power grow. She knew the pattern well: creation, pride, collapse. She had seen it in Troy, in Athens, in every city that crowned itself eternal. Yet she also knew that from ruin, knowledge always survived. When fire devoured Alexandria, she stood amid the smoke, her grey eyes reflecting the light of burning scrolls. She wept for the words lost to flame, but she did not despair. For every idea destroyed, another would rise elsewhere, reimagined, refined, reborn. The goddess who once shaped cities turned now to the quieter sanctuaries of the mind. In distant monasteries where the world's noise could not reach, monks copied the wisdom of the ancients by candlelight. They did not know her name, yet they followed her law. The flickering flames that lit their pages were the same golden hue that once gleamed upon her armor. Through the long centuries of shadow, Athena walked unseen among scholars, healers, and dreamers. She lived not in ritual, but in the pulse of understanding, the quiet joy when a question found its answer. The world no longer built temples of marble. It built cathedrals of thought. In time, the world stirred again. The Renaissance came like dawn breaking after 1,000 years of dusk. The painters and sculptors of Italy, reaching backward through history for light, found her image waiting. In fresco and stone, she emerged again, calm, deliberate, unyielding. The artists did not call her Athena, they called her sapientia, wisdom. Yet her eyes were the same grey depths of understanding, and her olive crown still glowed with restrained fire. She stood in the studios of Florence, in the libraries of Venice, in the notebooks of Leonardo, as he measured the motion of stars and the anatomy of man. She hovered near Galileo's telescope as he lifted it to the heavens, whispering, without words, "See for yourself." Athena had no temple now, but she did not need one. Every mind that sought to understand creation was her altar. Every discovery that bound chaos to reason was her hymn. Her spirit had crossed from mythology into meaning, from divinity into the living act of thought. Even in the new world of machines and empires, she did not fade. Her presence was woven into architecture, art, and language itself. The halls of government bore her symbols, scales, owls, and olive branches. Her statue stood above libraries and courthouses, her hand extended in calm authority. Yet few remembered her as goddess. They saw only the idea she had become, the personification of reason, justice, and enduring wisdom. She was there when laws were written with fairness instead of vengeance. She was there when humanity turned telescopes toward the unknown, when the pen replaced the sword, when silence replaced superstition. Her influence moved beneath the surface of every act of conscience and curiosity. The philosophers of the Enlightenment carried her light forward. They spoke of liberty, of truth, of human dignity, the same ideals she had whispered into the heart of Athens centuries before. She was no longer worshipped but practiced. In every debate, in every experiment, in every effort to understand the human spirit, Athena lived on. When revolutions came, tearing down old empires, she stood unseen beside those who carried hope instead of hatred. She guided reason through the noise of rebellion, reminding humankind that freedom without wisdom becomes chaos. Her voice, when it came, was not the command of a god, but the conscience of civilization itself. Remember, balance. And still, as ages turned, she remained. The modern world, loud and luminous, forgot her name, but not her gift. Her owl became a symbol of learning. Her olive branch became a sign of peace. Her temple, broken yet unyielding, became an emblem of endurance, the idea that beauty and truth outlast destruction. In museums, where fragments of her statues stand beneath glass, visitors pause and feel something unspoken. They see her calm expression, the perfect curve of her lips, the measured strength in her stance, and though they cannot name it, they recognize her. The wisdom that built their world stands before them in marble, and somewhere deep within, they understand she never left. The goddess of thought had simply transformed. Her power was no longer in prayers or offerings, but in every act of clarity, every word of understanding, every gesture of peace that defied the darker urges of the human heart. Athena had become the quiet rhythm of civilization itself, the still, guiding presence in a world forever learning, forever erring, forever reaching toward the light of comprehension. She had moved beyond Olympus, beyond Greece, beyond myth, and though no one now knelt before her altar, her work continued, wherever thought overcame ignorance, wherever reason conquered fear, wherever creation replaced destruction. No statue could contain her, no language could define her. She was the mind awakened, the calm center of all that endures. And as the centuries flowed onward, one truth remained unbroken across all the ruins, all the libraries, all the hearts that ever dared to seek. Wisdom had never died. It had simply changed its name. The goddess in silence, the world turned onward into an age of reason and noise, of iron wheels and engines that roared louder than prayer. The mountains that once echoed with hymns now trembled beneath the march of progress. Cities of marble became cities of smoke, yet through all of it, beneath the thunder of invention, the fever of discovery, and the endless pursuit of power, Athena endured. Not in temples, nor in statues, nor in names. She lived in silence. Her presence was no longer something men could point to or carve into stone. It was subtler now. Folded into the quiet moments between chaos, she was there in the turning of a page at midnight, in the dim lamp of a scholar bent over his desk, in the pause before an artist's brush touched canvas. She no longer demanded devotion. She asked only awareness. Athena had watched mortals evolve beyond myth. They had split atoms, mapped heavens, walked upon the face of the moon, yet for every light they kindled, a shadow followed. Knowledge had grown vast, but wisdom, true understanding, struggled to keep pace. The goddess saw minds sharpened like blades, but hearts left dull. She saw nations wield reason as a weapon, invention turned into chains. She walked unseen among laboratories and universities, her eyes reflecting the pale glow of screens instead of torches. She listened as brilliant men and women argued truth into fragments. The world no longer sought gods for answers, it sought itself. And yet, within that searching, she felt her pulse still. For every generation that forgets wisdom, another rediscovers it. In that age of electricity and empire, Athena spoke not in words but in sensation, the faint quickening of thought, the sudden stillness before revelation. When a scientist looked into the heart of matter and saw infinity, when a writer glimpsed the soul of humankind beneath the dust of history, she was there. Her voice was not sound but presence, a clarity that cut through the noise like dawn through fog. Once she had whispered to heroes on battlefields. Now she whispered to minds in turmoil. Be precise, her unseen tone urged. Be patient. Seek balance in every question. For truth without compassion is a weapon without aim. She moved through the 19th century like a shadow among thinkers, painters, poets. When Mary Shelley wrote of creation and consequence, Athena stood behind her shoulder. When Darwin struggled with the revelation that shook faith and science alike, Athena steadied his trembling pen. When Ada Lovelace looked upon numbers and saw not cold calculation but potential beauty, Athena's quiet pride glimmered through the candlelight. She had become the muse of understanding itself, the still figure in the mind that guides intuition toward harmony. She no longer appeared in visions, for mortals had learned to imagine her without seeing her. Her image lived behind their eyes. And yet, Athena knew sorrow. The same intellect she had nurtured since the dawn of civilization now turned upon itself. Wars were fought not for the gods, but for ideologies. Knowledge was used to destroy as much as to enlighten. Cities burned under skies filled with inventions she once would have admired. She walked among the ruins of a century's arrogance. Her armor dimmed, her eyes clouded with mourning. She did not weep, for tears would not mend what thought had broken. Instead, she knelt among the ashes and whispered, "Remember what knowledge is for. Remember that wisdom serves life, not conquest." Some heard her. In the quiet aftermath, poets wrote again of compassion. Philosophers spoke of conscience. Scientists sought cures instead of weapons. She saw in them the same spark she had seen in the first Athenians, the unending will to learn and to repair. By the time the new millennium rose, the world had forgotten the name Athena. Yet her mark was everywhere. The olive branch carved upon emblems of peace, the owl stamped upon schools and libraries, the spirit of inquiry that pulsed through every generation of thinkers and dreamers. Children, wide-eyed before books or stars, unknowingly prayed to her when they asked why. For every time a question was born from wonder instead of fear, the goddess stirred. She was no longer the deity of marble and spear. She was the breath that lingered between curiosity and comprehension. She no longer needed Olympus. The human mind had become her temple. Its neurons fired like stars. Its thoughts wove webs more intricate than any loom. Arachne's punishment had long ago become prophecy. Humanity itself now spun the threads of understanding, creating patterns that reached beyond even Athena's foresight. Yet even as knowledge soared, she sensed the danger she had always known, the same shadow that had haunted Troy and Athens and every empire since. Pride, the old enemy wearing a new face. Certainty. She drifted through towers of glass and steel, hearing the hum of power, the pulse of machines that thought faster than men. She saw intellect stretch beyond empathy, logic stripped of soul. The world she had shaped through ages now teetered on the edge of its own brilliance. Still, she did not turn away. Athena had never abandoned the imperfect. Her love for mortals was not born of their success, but of their striving. She whispered again, not from the sky, but from within. Remember humility. Remember the olive, not the spear. Wisdom is not conquest, but care. Sometimes someone heard her. A child looked up from a glowing screen and noticed the stars. A scientist hesitated before an experiment and chose restraint over pride. A writer captured truth in words that comforted rather than divided. And though the world rarely noticed, each act was a prayer, an unconscious echo of the goddess who still listened. At dusk, when cities flickered to life with 1,000 artificial suns, Athena would drift above them unseen. Her cloak shimmered faintly with the reflections of their lights, her eyes calm and knowing. She no longer needed to intervene. Humanity was her reflection, now flawed, brilliant, endlessly curious. And as night deepened, she would whisper through the hum of electricity and wind, "Every age forgets me. Every age finds me again. You are not children of chaos, but of thought. As long as you question, as long as you seek, I endure." Her voice would fade into the rhythm of the world, the pulse of traffic, the murmur of books opening, the quiet breath before invention. In that silence, she was everywhere, not as goddess, not as myth, but as the invisible symmetry that binds meaning to creation. She was the steady heart within the noise, the wisdom hidden inside the endless hum of progress. And though no altar bore her name, the world remained her temple, vast, restless, and forever reaching toward understanding. The immortal thread. Beneath the quiet hum of the modern world, where glass towers gleamed like polished spears and networks of light wrapped the earth in invisible webs, Athena's essence still moved. No longer bound to temples or marble likenesses, she lived within humanity's pulse, unseen but constant, the thread that stitched memory to discovery, history to imagination, Every civilization before had risen and fallen like a tide, but humanity itself endured, carried by the same force she had embodied since her birth. Thought, she was there, flowing through the invisible circuits of curiosity, flickering in the eyes of every child who looked at the stars and whispered questions to the dark. Athena had become a ghost in the age of reason, not forgotten, but transformed into the very thing she once taught men to revere. Her wisdom was now code and conversation, woven through languages, screens, and voices. She had no throne, no temple, only echoes in the minds of those who sought to understand more deeply. Still, she watched the balance she had always guarded teeter once again. For each invention born of wonder, another rose from greed. The same mind that healed could destroy. The same brilliance that illuminated could blind. Athena, the goddess of equilibrium, understood this duality better than anyone. She had been forged in it. And so, unseen, she began to guide humanity once more, not through miracles, but through moments. A scientist, after years of ambition, stood one night before his creation, a machine capable of shaping thought. He hesitated, hand trembling over a switch. Behind his uncertainty, there stirred a whisper, not a voice, but a thought not his own. Wisdom must come before power. He withdrew his hand. For the first time, the children listened not to memorize, but to understand. And Athena smiled. She no longer appeared in armor or radiance. Her divinity was the pause before a choice, the clarity that visited a conscience, the calm that arrived before compassion. Her voice, the same voice that had once guided kings, heroes, and artists, now spoke only in the language of thought. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the air was still and the world's machines fell silent, she walked once more upon the earth. No thunder, no flash, just a ripple of peace across the air. She would wander through cities, her form woven from light and memory. She watched the flicker of screens that showed humanity its own face, saw minds connected by unseen threads across oceans and continents. It reminded her of the loom of Arachne, vast, intricate, shimmering, and she understood. Mankind had become her weavers. They were spinning a tapestry larger than any temple wall one made, not of silk or gold, but of shared knowledge, shared voices. Each idea, each act of creation, was a thread. Some gleamed with hope, others darkened with arrogance. Yet the web itself was beautiful, an echo of her first gift to the world. In this new age, Athena became both presence and mirror. She no longer separated gods from mortals. She saw only creators flawed, striving, infinite in potential. She had taught them to think, and now their thoughts built worlds. But she also saw the danger. The more they mastered, the more they forgot wonder. The higher they reached, the less they remembered the ground beneath their feet. So she walked unseen among them, breathing reminders into their restless hearts. When an artist broke down in frustration before a blank canvas, her breath became courage. When a child cried after being silenced, her touch became defiance. When a thinker stood on the edge of discovery and feared what might follow, her presence steadied the trembling hand. Athena was no longer separate from humankind, she was its reflection. Every act of insight, every spark of empathy, was her heartbeat. The old world had known her as goddess. The new world knew her as truth itself. She was logic in the storm, compassion in the court, curiosity in the lab. She was not worshipped, but she was lived. And yet, even as progress filled the earth, Athena sometimes stood alone among the ruins of her first home, the Acropolis. The air there still shimmered with memory. The Parthenon, though scarred and broken, stood like a skeleton of perfection. The marble glowed faintly beneath the stars. She would stand at its center, her footsteps stirring no dust, her form woven of moonlight and time. The wind moved through the columns, making a low, resonant tone. the same hum that once filled her temples when mortals sang hymns in her honor. It was the music of endurance, of civilization itself breathing through stone. She looked out upon Athens, sleeping and silent, its lights flickering below like distant embers. The goddess smiled faintly, her face illuminated by starlight. "So much has changed," she whispered, her voice softer than wind, "and yet it is always the same. You build, you fall, you rise again. You seek me in the stars, but I am always within." A breeze moved through the olive trees that still grew among the ruins. Their leaves shimmered silver under the moon, descendants of the first tree she had struck from the rock long ago. Their scent filled the night air with quiet sweetness. Athena walked among them, her hand brushing their trunks. She could feel life pulsing within the bark, slow and steady. "You have never forgotten," she murmured, "even when you no longer remember my name." From the city below, the faint sounds of life drifted upward: laughter, a song, a mother's voice calling her child home. Athena closed her eyes and listened. Each sound, simple and human, was more sacred than any prayer. It was the proof that her gift endured. She had taught them to think, yes, but also to feel, to build, to hope. Even in their failures, she saw beauty, for failure was how wisdom was born. The wind shifted. The marble pillars gleamed one last time in the moonlight, then faded into shadow. Athena turned her gaze toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to pale the sky. The first light touched the sea, and the world seemed to breathe again. It was the same dawn she had watched over since her birth countless centuries ago, when she had first stepped from the mind of Zeus in a flash of light. The same sun, the same sea, the same endless story of thought becoming creation. The goddess stood upon the broken stones and whispered, her voice carried by the wind that once bore her words to heroes and kings. "Wisdom does not die. It changes form. It moves from lips to pen, from hand to mind, from mind to soul. It endures as long as one heart still seeks to understand." And with that, she turned from the ruins, her form dissolving into the soft gold of morning. The olive leaves rustled in her wake, scattering sunlight across the marble floor. The city awoke below, unaware that the goddess had stood among them once more. But they would feel her, as they always had in their questions, in their compassion, in the fragile, luminous thread that connects all thought. For Athena had never truly gone. She had simply become the voice behind every act of wisdom, the still point in the turning world, the immortal thread in the fabric of humanity, the last light of Athena. Dawn spread softly over the marble bones of the Acropolis, gilding each column and broken lintel in a hush of amber. The Parthenon stood scarred, yet still defiant, its wounds catching the sun as though they too were proud of having endured. In that light, the world seemed both ancient and new, the echo of one age, whispering into the ear of another. Athena lingered on the hill, unseen, her form woven from the brightness itself. The centuries had stripped away her temples, her statues, her hymns, but they had not erased her pulse from the earth. The wind that stirred the olive trees still spoke her name in the rustle of its leaves. The quiet hum of the city below still carried her rhythm, though no one recognized it anymore. She had watched humanity grow restless beneath the stars. Their eyes, once lifted to her for wisdom, now searched galaxies and atoms for meaning. They had conquered nature, rewritten fate, even reached beyond the sky, and yet, in the hollow of all that achievement, something remained untouched, unanswered. The goddess knew that feeling well. It was the silence between questions, the hunger that even knowledge cannot fill. She felt it in every age. It was not a flaw in mankind, but their greatest virtue, the refusal to stop seeking. Athena stepped lightly among the ruins of her temple. The stone beneath her feet still hummed faintly with the memory of prayers. The walls, though broken, retained the symmetry she had once taught her builders to love. She placed a hand upon one of the ancient columns, and beneath her touch, The marble seemed to stir, faint sparks of gold flickering in its veins. "How far you have come," she whispered, her voice barely more than breath, "and how far you still must go." She looked out upon the waking world. The city stretched in every direction, a tapestry of glass and motion. Cars moved like streams of mercury through the streets. The hum of machines filled the air. The wind carried the scent of steel instead of salt. Yet within that clamour, she heard something familiar, the heartbeat of creation. Humanity was still weaving, still building, still trying to find meaning in the vastness it had inherited. Athena closed her eyes. The noise softened until she could hear the quiet beneath it, the rhythm of thought, the same ancient melody that had played since the first mortal picked up a chisel, or a brush, or a pen, or dared to dream. She had once believed wisdom to be something that could be taught, but now, after millennia of watching, she understood it could only be awakened. Knowledge might be passed like fire, but wisdom had to grow, slow as an olive tree. The air around her shimmered. For a moment, she was not the goddess of marble or myth, but something vaster, the breath within thought itself. Across the world, in every mind turned toward understanding, her light flickered. In the desert, a young girl wrote equations in the sand, her brow furrowed, her heart alight with wonder. In the mountains, an old man painted the same horizon he had watched all his life, trying to capture the color between dawn and day. In a crowded hospital, a tired doctor stood beside a stranger and chose compassion over convenience. Each act, small and unremarkable, shone like a single ember in the tapestry of her spirit. She did not need temples for worship, only these moments of clarity, these fragile sparks of grace. Athena smiled faintly, the dawn brightening behind her. "You are my temple now," she murmured. "You, the seekers and the dreamers. You are the immortality I was meant to find. It's—" She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the light gathered above the sea. Her reflection flickered upon the surface of the water, not as a goddess, but as pure illumination. The same light that once flashed from Zeus's mind, the same brilliance that had shaped her birth, now spread across the waking world. Every age she had touched shimmered before her: Athens in its golden hour, Rome in its might, the Renaissance rising like a second dawn, the modern cities of glass. Somewhere, a bell rang, a church bell, bronze and human-made. The sound rolled through the morning air, mingling with her whisper. It did not matter what god it called to worship, the echo belonged to her, too. Athena walked to the edge of the Acropolis, her form wreathed in sunlight. Below, the people of Athens hurried through their day, unaware that the goddess they once crowned with laurels now walked among them in silence. Yet she needed no recognition. Her work was complete, her purpose fulfilled. Humanity had taken her lessons into its bones. For a long moment, she stood there, watching the light rise over the sea, her cloak rippling like mist. The olive trees swayed in the wind, their leaves flashing silver and green like the thoughts of men, always shifting, always alive. A single leaf broke free and drifted through the air. Athena reached out, caught it gently between her fingers, and studied its delicate veins. "Fragile," she said softly, "and yet it endures." She let it fall. It spiraled down the cliffside, spinning in slow grace until it disappeared into the sunlight. Her eyes followed it, and for the first time in many ages, the goddess felt peace. Not the peace of endings, but of continuance, the knowledge that what she had begun would never truly cease. As the day climbed higher, her form began to fade. The light passed through her like water, until she was no longer figure or shadow, but radiance itself. She became the shimmer upon the columns, the whisper in the wind, the glint in the eyes of those who still sought truth. The olive branches swayed once more, their soft rustle the last sound before the city fully woke. And in that breath between dawn and day, when the world seemed to hold its pulse still for a single heartbeat, Athena's voice, calm, distant, eternal, moved across the air like a sigh. Think clearly, build wisely, love deeply, for in those acts I remain. Then the light took her, and she was gone, not vanished, but returned to the current of thought that flows through every living mind. Below, life continued. Laughter, footsteps, questions. The olive tree stood unmoving, its leaves glimmering like small mirrors in the sun. And somewhere in the murmur of the breeze, just faint enough to doubt, a whisper lingered. Not prayer, not memory, but awareness. The awareness that wisdom still walks among us, silent and unending, waiting to be heard.